Hi, I'm Ben.
And I'm Josh.
And this is the Bad at Magic Podcast, a podcast about games, life, and other things. And welcome to episode 107.
I'm going to take a moment to point out to all of our listeners that by the fact that we are creating and putting this out in the world, this work that we have created is by default copyrighted. You do not have our permission to reproduce and use this for your own personal monetary gain. However, there are exceptions to that rule, and those exceptions are codified in 17 U.S. Code Section 107. Haha.
Okay,
107.
there it is. If for a second you were starting to sound like that Facebook post that old people copy and paste into their feed.
So the Section 107 is the fair use exception of copyright law. It's actually very short if you go look at the actual text of it. It says the short version of the short law is that criticism, comments, news reporting, teaching, and research are not considered infringement upon the copyright. However, whenever you are using a copyrighted material outside of the fair use copyright, there are four kind of tests that they will look at to assign whether or not this is actually fair use under Section 107. That is, they look at the purpose and the character of the use, whether you're actually monetizing it or profiting off of it, or if you're just using it for educational purposes. The nature of the copyrighted work itself. So if it's like a music or a song, that's going to be like looked at differently than if it's an academic paper. The amount and sustainability of the portion that you used in relation to the whole. So if there's, some AAA movie and you take a 30-second clip from it as part of your movie podcast to make a point, that's going to be different than if you just watch the movie with you as a tiny little speaking head in the bottom right-hand corner. That may not be fair use.
Those sounded like hypothetical situations, but those are both things that people do.
Those are both very clear, normal things that people do. And one of them is probably okay and one of them is probably not. The last one is the effect of the use upon the potential market for or the value of the work. So if you are doing something like, I'm using this as total fair use because I'm commenting on it. You're commenting on it as a tiny head in the bottom right corner, and you showed the entire movie for free on YouTube. Like,
this
we are still charging
new.
tickets
If anybody that's ever seen Mystery Science Theater 3000 knows this. But, okay, I'm glad you gave a tutorial on this, Josh, because this is a poorly understood thing and really important. Because in the realm of copyright law, you want someone that creates an original work to be protected from having their work stolen and used for profit by someone else. But you also don't want your copyright protections be so restrictive that any kind of creative expression is illegal.
Yes.
And you can see the dangers of either end of that spectrum.
That is correct. And it's no doubt that larger corporations have abused some of the copyright laws, even if they're impacting on fair use type stuff. Because here's the thing. Let's say, for example, I don't know, hypothetical, totally random person, Disney. The Disney Corporation is extremely litigious. Do not mess with Disney. But if you or I were doing something that may or may not be infringing upon fair use of one of Disney's works, there's no doubt in my mind that we would get slammed with a ton of legal stuff from their legal team telling us to cease and desist. Now, even if our stuff is still fair use, even if what we're doing is completely protected under this law, how much would you or I have to pocket to go to court, to get a lawyer, to fight these allegations? Like, just the hourly wages of a lawyer.
It's prohibitive. We would just have to give up.
Exactly. And so that's where the fair use kind of protection, in air quotes, breaks down. It's like, yeah, you're totally protected and you're totally right. But a lot of times in this country, we don't have systems where the defending party gets reimbursed for their legal fees.
I saw this brilliant little video, link in the show notes. Ed Sheeran just went through a court case where he was being sued because someone was accusing him of ripping off their song to make his song. He's a target because he's a popular artist and makes a lot of money, so if they win against him, they would get a lot of money. In this case, he practiced one of those things like that group that does the 4-chord rock where you can just play 100 songs in a row and show that they all play the same 4 chords.
Yes.
And he did this thing where he played a musical montage of the song he was being accused of copying and then played like 6 songs before it that it sounded like it was copying. It was brilliant. Like, it must have gone over so well in the courtroom. Like, what was Rudyard Kipling? Under the sun, there's nothing new. Poem or pun, under the sun, there's nothing new.
Look at you quoting people. I was just going to say everything's a remix, and that's like a popular YouTube video explaining how music just keeps reusing the same chords over and over.
Yeah, there's only a finite amount of copies. We might talk about that with language later on. Ooh. I want to follow up on something from episode 106.
Okay.
So you pointed out that October 6th, was the date of the release of the original talkie full-length feature film, The Jazz Singer. When I was doing research for that in post-production, I kept searching up The Jazz Singer, and this particular image kept coming up. Did you search The Jazz Singer?
Yes, I didn't touch on this, but the movie is the content and the plot line of the movie is not something that is politically correct at all in modern day.
Yeah, so the main character played by Al Jolson is like this ethnic Jew that's trying to get accepted, and so he's getting into music that's not of his primary culture, in this case jazz, which tended to have an African-American centric production to it. And so the climax of the film is when he dresses up in blackface and performs this jazz number. And so all these images I kept coming across searching up The Jazz Singer were really kind of what are culturally disturbing images of seeing a white man dressed up in blackface and just looking like all of the bad norms associated with that.
This is why I floated the idea that now that it's in the fair use or the copyright has expired on it, there's going to be a ton of film school adaptations on this, because they're going to take this really controversial idea and they're going to flip it on its head in some weird, interesting way to prove to my professor that I have what it takes.
They kind of have. And so when I was trying to research it, I found that like at the time, he was hiding the fact personally that he was an ethnic Jew and that he had opportunities he wasn't able to get because of racism against him. And so it actually him portraying someone as blackface to be able to perform jazz was actually a riff on the fact that he couldn't be an actor in Hollywood as a Jew.
I mean, that's the thing. There are a lot of ethnically Jewish actors that have changed their names, like back in the day, or they've been around forever and they changed their names.
Yeah, I think he may be one of them.
Interesting.
Yep. Yeah. Anyway, so there was all of that. Another thing is during that episode, I think I had an unusually high amount of factual inaccuracies. Like we talked about like 100 cartoons and when they came out and stuff. I probably got the details wrong on at least half of them. I also poorly attributed 2 quotes, and I may have messed up the genetic mechanics of cystic fibrosis. And of all those things that I got wrong, one fact that I got wrong, like 3 people messaged me to tell me that I was 1 year off on the year of my sister's birth.
You didn't know when your sister was born? She's a text message away, Ben. Like this is like we're so interconnected now. It's so easy to find those things. You probably could have looked that up on Facebook. It's just the heavy sigh.
So she turns 40 this year also, just like you. You and her are the same age. She was born in 1983, not 1984. That was what I got wrong. But she's born in December. I was born in June. And all I know is that we're 7 years apart. So when you're 6 years and 6 months apart as opposed to 7 years and 6 months, whatever. I don't know why I'm defending it. I got that wrong and everyone wanted to correct me on it. Sorry.
So I jumped on that bandwagon because it's just funny. But at the same time, like, listeners, give us a break. We're both 2 like cis white dudes. Like I go to the school to sign my kids out for the day. Like, oh, what grade is they in? What's their teacher's name? And I just stare at them blankly. And I was like, don't you have a computer? Put in the name. I don't know any of this stuff. Do I look like my wife? Get out of here.
I'm with you. Like, I'm lucky. My brother and sister's birthdays are 1 day apart, and I can never remember which is which. So I feel lucky if I get that right, but let alone the year. I know we're 7 years apart. I got the wrong year. Anyway, there is one factual inaccuracy that we did that's a kind of a pet peeve of mine, but I deliberately threw it out the window, and I want to tell you why, and that is quote attribution. So I used 2 popular quotes that people had probably heard of before in episode 106. One is a quote, "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic."
One of my favorites.
I attribute it tongue-in-cheek to Isaac Asimov because he's a science fiction author. I was actually really close. Isaac Asimov was born in 1920 and lived till 1992. It's actually a quote from Arthur C. Clarke, who's also a science fiction author of those same years. So
yeah, he's a contemporary of Asimov.
Close contemporary. Yeah,
close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades, sir. You totally gave the credit to the wrong person.
So I'm correcting it now. The other one I quoted was, "If I have seen further than others, it is by standing upon the shoulders of giants." And I knew I wasn't even close with this, so I just tongue-in-cheek attributed to Abraham Lincoln. It was actually Isaac Newton. Now, when it comes to quote attribution, there's this weird thing that happens where a quote becomes part of the zeitgeist and it gets attributed to someone, maybe incorrectly, but then when someone repeats it and then you get secondary and tertiary and quadrenary or whatever it's called, quotations, it starts to gain artificial credibility. Do you know what I mean? Like if you do a Google search on it, you'll find a quote of a quote of a quote, and you won't have any original source, and then everyone just thinks that's who said it.
Okay, I've got 2 little short vignettes for this then.
Okay.
The first one is, if you don't know the author of a quote, just say Mark Twain. Mark Twain has so many quotes attributed to him that he never said. Like, even in his lifetime, like, it bothered him. Like, he's on record as being like, I don't know why everybody
This is going to be a new Bad at Magic meta joke.
Yeah, we'll just quote everything to Mark Twain.
Yeah.
The second one is CGP Grey did an excellent discussion about exactly what you're talking about in his... he did a video about the name Tiffany, but then he did a follow-up video about the name Tiffany, about how his research path of how he figured out when Tiffany became a name. And he had this poem that he found that mentioned the word Tiffany, and he kept trying to trace it back to its origins. And what he found was every book would trace it back to a previous book that just quoted it from a book before that. And he never was able to drill down and find the actual original source. And so he wasn't like he couldn't attribute it to anything.
Yeah. And that was actually, all of that you said was kind of what I was getting at when I would just threw out fake names for these 2 quotes that I used. It's because there have been times where I've tried to find the original author of a quote, and I have that problem where I can't ever get to the original source. But in this case, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic is very clearly attributed to Arthur C. Clarke, and if I've seen further than others, it is by standing upon the shoulders of giants, was in a letter in the handwriting of Sir Isaac Newton to another physicist. Now, curiously, that particular quote, some people believe that rather than it being an expression of humility, was actually a dig at the guy he was writing the letter to, who was notably short.
I love that you find these old-timey, like, super passive digs at people. Like, you can find these in history. Again, point back to that same video I was talking about with CGP Grey, link in the show notes. And he talks about how he found this letter correspondence between two old-timey writers and how they were basically ripping each other apart in super polite high society language.
Yeah. Wow, we're going to talk about all those things today.
Well, and Josh, actually, I've got talking about what you're saying here, like, we can just misattribute quotes whoever we want to Mark Twain. I've got a better one for you, Ben. Let's transition to Bad at Technology. Have you ever heard of the Library of Babel?
No.
Okay.
Well, only because you sent me a Vsauce clip talking about it, but I didn't watch the whole thing, and so I don't really know what that's all about.
I love this. All right, I'm going to start by saying that now.
Hang on. Before you start, when I hear something like Library of Babel, it sounds to me like it's Library of Congress, but instead of Congress, it's Babel. Library of Congress is like the idea that we have this authoritative library that has all the books in it, and Babel is this biblical idea of this heretical people that thought that they could make their way to God by building a tower that was high enough. So combining those 2 terms together sounds like it's about something that's like all of human knowledge in order to reach God.
It's not that. It's using human language to, well, we're not going to go there because you can attribute anything to anything. So here's what I'm going to say. If you don't know where something's from, just say you found it in the Library of Babel. And then I'm going to explain why that makes sense.
Okay.
So the Library of Babel is a website that you can go to. It is completely free. libraryofbabel.info. It's a .info, totally free. And if you'll recall, there was, I don't know, maybe a year or 2 ago now, I had a shower thought that I shared on the podcast where because we think in the terms of words and because we package our ideas into human language, I hypothesized, does that mean that there is a finite amount of ideas that we can have because we are putting our brains into these boxes?
You're talking about in the theoretical respect?
In a theoretical sense, yeah. Because we choose to articulate ourselves in spoken language. Spoken language has a finite number of sounds that we can make, a finite number of symbols that it can be represented. That means we take this infinite concept of our consciousness and we have to like put it through this filter that makes it a finite way of articulating ourselves.
Okay, I want to go off on a real brief tangent. So
you just do not want me to talk about this at all, do you?
No, you're just triggering so many ideas. A couple years ago, computers were not yet powerful enough to do something as simple as beat a human at a game of chess.
Okay, yes.
But as computing power and storage and memory have increased, we've gotten to the point where that's almost trivial. Now, a computer can calculate every possible move from every possible position and outsmart you no matter what.
Yes. Unless for the most part, yes. It knows the game better.
In that respect, we call chess solved in quotes. Chess is now solved. Like tic-tac-toe was solved a long time ago. We've now reached the point where we solve chess. From what I understand, we've not yet solved the game called Go, or we only recently have.
I don't think we've solved Go because there's too many combinations and too many weird things that happen in that game.
Yeah. So we're approaching that. Now, what you're saying is that you think there's a point in the future where we'll be able to solve language or thought?
Solve thought. Well, this is the concept. This was the shower thought that I have. Are we constraining thought to a finite box by putting it into language? Well, the Library of Babel that I stumbled upon, I heard it on another podcast. I don't remember where I originally got it from, but I found it, and this is the synthesis of that shower thought that I have. So I'm going to try to explain this as simply as possible, but a guy made an algorithm that you can put in... how do I explain it? All right, so it's built of a library. Like, conceptually, it's a library with books, and books have pages. And every single page in this library has been assigned a base 10 number, from 1 to a ginormous number, okay? And what he did is he has an algorithm that takes the page number, and then the algorithm spits out an even bigger number, like this just massive, ginormous number. He converts that number in base 10 to base 29, which he uses 29 because then each individual character can be represented with every letter of the alphabet, including a space, a period, and a comma. And what that does, like you converting that big base 10 number to that base 29, it shows the letters, and it spits out these random characters on this page. The algorithm ensures that every single possible combination will be generated at some point inside of this quote-unquote library that he's created.
Does it throw out nonsensical combinations?
It does not throw out nonsensical combinations. It is every possible
combination.
Every possible combination of letters, a period, a space, and a comma. And right. The algorithm is reversible. So you can feed it text, and you can feed it backwards to the algorithm, and it will spit out the page number that text exists on. So
wow.
This guy.
So we could take a transcript of what we're saying right now in this podcast and find a reference in the Library of Babel for it.
We'll find the
been written down.
We'll find the exact page number that it is on. This guy created an algorithm that has created or written down or encapsulates every possible thing that ever can be or will be said in this language is in this library.
I heard of this a long time ago. I think Mark Twain said, if you had an infinite number of monkeys typing on an infinite number of typewriters, they would write the works of Shakespeare. You're saying we've actually done this? We've invented the monkeys and the typewriters?
Better than that, because the monkeys and the typewriters, you would have to look at all the pages to find where the works of Shakespeare were. This one, you just look it up, and it will tell you exactly what page that the works of Shakespeare are on.
Okay, I'm going to try this. Link in the show notes I'll pick a segment of something you and I said here in this podcast, and then I will look it up in the Library of Babel and give the reference for it. Wow.
I can't emphasize this point enough. Conceptually, it's like, cool. You think about it, you're like, oh, that's interesting. It is an unsettlingly eerie sense like that you get when you sit down and you type in something completely random and then hit enter, and it shows you exactly what page that already exists on. And like stuff, anything that you want is one thing, but then you start typing stuff like, this person was born in this place on this date, and hit enter, and then it spits out a page number. Yeah, here is the entry that contains exactly all of your birth information.
And this isn't a trick. It's not just doing it in reverse.
It's all there. It can be infinitely reproduced. It's always going to be on the same page. Like, you can sit and just click through the pages if you want, and I did this too. It's nonsense upon nonsense upon nonsense, and then all of a sudden, like a paragraph of words, and then nonsense, and then nonsense, and then nonsense.
This blows my mind. I'll never forget this Bob Newhart gag from back in the 80s where he said, hey, Jimmy, I think we got some over here. Monkey number 4,448. To be or not to be, that is the Schlamoozlefaboggle.
Almost had it. The only limitation to this thing, I will say, is that you can only search for, I think, 3,200 characters. Any longer than that, I think it exceeds what's the amount of text that's on one page. So
I can already see lots of limitations. I mean, what about apostrophes? What about quotation marks? What about...
Well, here's the thing, though. Like, the fact that he did this, and it's only English characters, yes, it's all lowercase, it's only 3 forms of punctuation, yes, I understand all of that, but this is a proof of concept. If he did it for these characters, there's no reason you can't throw in every Arabic character, every Chinese character, every Cyrillic character, every piece of punctuation, alter the algorithm to do exactly the same thing, and just generate a much larger output.
So is this a database, or is it just an algorithm? Because this would take up an astounding amount of storage. So
they actually mentioned that. This library, conceptually, contains 10 raised to the 5,000 power of pages, of digital pages.
That's a huge number.
To put it in context, scientists believe that there are only 10 raised to the 80 power of atoms in the observable universe. So again,
I loved it. I love the audacity of humanity. Let's just invent a math problem that creates more words than there are atoms in the known universe.
Pages, and each page contains 3,200 characters. It's not a physical thing. It's not a database. It's not stored anywhere. It's not printed out on pieces of paper. It is an algorithm. So whenever you search for a specific thing, it will spit out what you're looking for. Whenever you go to a specific page, it generates it in real time. But the algorithm is consistent and repeatable, so it will always produce the same thing every time.
You keep finding these curiosities like this, like what 3 words? We haven't talked about that one in a while, but just curious ways to use math to approximate the real world with an astounding degree of accuracy.
I tell my kids this all the time. Math is the most important subject you can learn in school because math explains how the universe works. I think this is also why I like economics so much, is because when I was growing up, math always made sense to me and human interaction made no sense whatsoever. And then economists came along and started explaining to me how human behavior in the aggregate can be solved with math. And I just love economists for it.
I think you're quite lonely in those observations, Josh.
There's no, Ben. I think my entire profession will agree with me. I just found my people.
I know, all 460,000 of them. Okay. Well, while we're talking about interesting technological developments, I'm going to give a nothing burger, the iPhone 15 announcement this week.
A nothing burger? Excuse me, sir. No. This is Muhammad Ali versus another famous boxer. I don't know, Mark Twain.
But I've seen so many great memes about this. Like, for instance, I saw one that showed the last 4 iPhone upgrades all side by side and asked you to vote for which order they came out in, and no one can do it. Like, so, what? You went from 2 cameras to 3 cameras. It's the same form factor. It's the same size.
Ben, you're softballing. You're trying to slide in this little monumental change that Apple was forced to make, and I want you to say it so I can gloat.
It's the USB-C charger.
It's the USB-C charger, baby! Woo! We did it! We did it, everyone! The EU won.
I'm not against this. I don't know why you're acting like I'm antagonistic to the USB-C transformation.
No, this is...
I'm not.
This is an... All right, so the absurdity of this whole thing blows my mind. Like,
it's absurd.
You wrote this whole sentence and I'm taking over. Nope, this is my conversation now. Because the EU was so mad at Apple for having these proprietary chargers that... Completely aside from what the EU did, they are objectively worse. They use USB 2.0 speeds. Like, they're just worse than USB-C cables are. But the EU was so mad. Like, you can't have proprietary cables that you then change every couple of years to force your consumers to keep buying new crap in order to charge their phones. You need to get on board. Everybody else in the industry, literally everyone else in the industry, is using USB-C. USB-C charging cables are for all devices everywhere. You have to do USB-C for the EU. And then Apple, being the people that don't want to do stuff, like, well, kick the dirt, all right, but we're going to do it in the most Apple way possible. And what they came out with,
there's
the USB...
always been proprietary Apple connectors as long as the Apple computers have existed.
So there have always been proprietary Apple computer connectors. Well, now it's not. It's not a proprietary connector. It's a USB-C connector, but it is still limited to USB 2.0 speeds because we're Apple and
on the base model. The Pro model is USB 3.0.
Oh, the Pro model gets the good stuff. That's literally one tiny chip that costs them not a fraction of a cent to upgrade. They're jerks for doing it. Second, They have proprietary USB-C Apple cables that have hardware built into the cable that will tell the phone, I am an Apple cable and I am made for iPhone.
Really?
And then, yes, and that will upgrade the...
No, I want to see a source.
That will increase the charging speed for it. It goes from like 5 watts to like the 20-watt fast charging if the cable tells the phone it's an Apple cable.
Josh, I get that. Did you do any research on this? Because I get that you have a knee-jerk, like, you're looking to prove your hypothesis that they're just the evil empire. But, like, maybe there's a reason for that to, like, prevent overcharging or, like, damage to the device or something like that.
There's absolutely a reason for this, and that is reason number 3, the most absurd of the whole thing, is that Apple, on their website right now, is selling a dongle that converts old Lightning connectors to USB-C, and it cost $30. It's 2 inches long. It's like Lightning cables is just rewiring the USB-C anyway. Like, this is the most... I
don't know why anyone would do that.
Absurd Apple thing I've ever heard. I saw people online they would post the dongle and they say, "Oh, look, you can get a 20-watt fast charger and a USB 3 C2C cable for half the price of this stupid dongle."
Okay, well, while we're talking about cell phone chargers, I want to talk about the life-changing transformation I made when I changed to the magnetic connector on the back. Like
the mag thing.
Yeah, the mag-lock. Like, I stopped plugging cables into my phone a long time ago, and I love it. Like, not plugging something in and out, it makes such a huge difference.
Have you ever thought about the fact the wireless charger is actually more restrictive for the movement of the phone than your wired charger?
The battery life on it is good enough that I never use it when it's plugged in.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, if you wanted to plug your phone, if you want to charge your phone and look at it at the same time, the wired charger is actually better. It's like, oh, the wireless charger is so much more convenient, but the wired charger lets you actually move it around.
I'm just talking about the fact that, like, at the end of the day, when I'm tired and I just want to throw my phone on the nightstand, like, it just connects. It's easy.
I have a wireless charger for my nightstand when I throw my phone on that at night. And then throughout the house, just scattered throughout the house, we have USB-C fast chargers plugged in all over the place with the cables just dangling. I have one on the desk that I'm sitting at right now. So anybody that's sitting here, just plug in a phone.
Okay, so that reminds me of something that's been happening over here. You might remember this, but as technology has proliferated, it creates these weird anomalies that aren't on purpose and no one thought of it, but it just turns into a car accident. In this case, you have government computers that allow information either up to for official use only level or the secret level or above. But then you have people with devices. Because our chargers have gotten together with our cables we use for transferring data, you get this weird amalgamation where someone will take their personal cell phone and plug it into a government computer only intending to charge it, but then it generates an event in the onboard security software that makes it look like they're trying to offload data from a government information system. And this happens all the time, and part of it's just because there aren't chargers. Like, we haven't put chargers in anywhere. So because there aren't chargers and there's the USB port sitting right there on their desktop, people plug their phones in.
So first of all, people, don't plug your phone or your computer to charge it. It's only 5 watts. Like, you're getting almost no charge out of it.
But you're right. If all we did was just buy a bunch of fast chargers and put them everywhere, like you said, how you got them throughout your house. It's like if you don't want to see garbage on the ground, instead of yelling at people for putting garbage on the ground, put trash cans everywhere.
Yeah, there you go. For our listeners that might not realize this, like, these computers that Ben was talking about, like, it's a hard limit. Like, if this computer is built for the secret network, it's not allowed to connect to any other network. And so if you plug in your phone to that computer, that phone now belongs to the secret network. And boy, howdy, like, the IT department's going to come kick in your door and take your phone away from you and probably
they'll
arrest you.
Confiscate it and physically destroy it.
And
dramatically.
And assuming that they don't, like, you can convince them that you're not a malicious actor trying to steal information off the network and prevent yourself from being arrested, detained, and questioned.
Yeah, they're reporting cross-domain events to the 3-star. He's talking about it weekly.
Ooh, yeah, you can't move stuff from one network to the other network. That's really bad. It can go up, but it's never allowed to go down.
Yeah. Anyway, there's one other bad technology thing I want to talk about, and we've kind of mentioned this tongue-in-cheek in the podcast, but we've actually participated in it, and I want to talk about the meta event, and that is the transformation of the network formerly known as Twitter to X. Now, if you go to X, yes, and here's why. I think that this secretly has been one of the most brilliant things that Elon Musk has ever done. And I'm not like what do they call him, a Muscovite or whatever, the Elon Musk lovers. Muscovite's the word they use to describe someone from Moscow. But I was in 1 week's time. I read a newspaper, I watched a news broadcast, I read a news article, and I watched a couple of YouTube videos. And every single one of those, there's this thing that happens now where when someone wants to mention a tweet, in the past they may have just said so and so tweeted this and move on real fast, and now they stop, and for about 4 times the length of how they previously might have talked about the network, they'll say something to the effect of the website formerly known as Twitter, now known as X, and then they'll say the thing. It's like the best advertising campaign ever. Like everywhere, every time somebody was talking about this, now they stop talking about whatever they were talking about and talk about Elon Musk's new website for like 5 seconds.
Okay, so
it's brilliant.
Which begs the question, was this Elon Musk that figured this out, or was this some marketing executive that figured this out?
I think it was accidental.
I think this is Occam's razor.
Companies rebrand all the time.
Things rebrand all the time. But all right, so that's Occam's razor, this thing. Let's assume, like, if we assume that it was a marketing person, then this whole thing was sold to Elon Musk. Like, hey, we can do this. And then if intelligent questions were asked in that meeting, like, do we have the rights to that? And the marketing guy goes, no. And that's the best part, because then it creates this big hubbub that everybody's going to hear about. Or
maybe they foresaw it. I don't think they foresaw it to the extent that it happened.
And which leads me then to the other side. If it was Elon Musk that thought of this, then it really just is him putting his ego on the whole site. Like, oh, let's change the name to this, sir. We don't have the rights to that. I don't care. We're going forward anyway. And then it created this big hubbub, which on the other side ended up being a good thing. But did he think of that in advance? I doubt it.
But this transformation happened like 2 months ago. I mean, how long are we going to do this? Like, I remember back in the 80s or 90s when the artist Prince changed his name from Prince, I don't even know what it was before that. He's prone to changing his name. Went from Prince to an unpronounceable symbol. And every time you had to refer to him, they would say the artist formerly known as Prince. And it was the same kind of thing where you'd stop talking about what you were trying to talk about and talk about his little decision that he made. And that's what's happening right now with Twitter. How long is this going to last? It's already been going on for like 2 months.
Whatever newscaster came up with the artist formerly known as Prince should have trademarked it right that second. He should get a nickel for every time somebody had to say that.
Because now it's the website formerly known as Twitter.
I hate that. Like, the only reason it's even a thing is because people in the news media are trying to do the right thing, right? They're trying to put out the correct information, and so they give you the overarching details because this is so stupid. But if they just say X, they're going to leave out everybody that hasn't heard that Twitter changed its name to X. And if they just say Twitter, they're going to lose all the Zoomers. They're like, what are they talking about? I'm on X.
This is similar to the running discussion we have about spoilers. Like, how long did they have to keep saying the website formerly known as Twitter before it's just considered part of the zeitgeist?
If it was me, Ben, I would just keep calling it Twitter. Like, if it was my network, I was in charge of like C-SPAN or CNN or whatever, it'd be like, just call it Twitter. Everybody knows what Twitter is. It'll be fine. And then just be the one network that refuses to call it something else.
I think you would have to do something deliberately ridiculous in order to figure out what the limits of this are. Like, let's say next month they changed it again. Would there be a point where people would, and then the month after that they change it again, and the month after that they change it again? Are we just in this perpetual trying to keep up with what pronouns Twitter's chosen to call themselves by, or do we just give up and say that Twitter?
Oh, you jerk. Okay, so how dare you bring pronouns into this? Because I feel very strongly about, like, we should respect the pronouns that are chosen by a person. But I don't respect Twitter changing its name because I don't think Twitter is a person. I think Twitter is a business and a company and an amalgamation of incentives to make money.
But what if a person did that too and changed their pronouns every month consecutively for a year?
Then I would respect whatever choice they made at the time, because there's
a limit. There's
not for a person. A person.
What if they had daily pronouns and they corrected you acrimoniously every time you used them wrong? Here's my chart of my pronouns. Today I'm this pronoun. Get it right. There's a limit. There's absolutely a limit.
It doesn't matter. Me personally, addressing that person directly, I would do my best to use the correct verbiage that they wanted me to use. Now, if they're changing it daily, which is absurd, anybody besides that person, we're going to fall into a whatever's convenient for a conversation. I'd make sure that we're both identifying the same individual. It's probably going to be a they-them situation. But to the person's face... To the person's face, you've got to be respectful.
I've changed my name to an unpronounceable symbol. Yeah, well, sir, we're going to have to call you something.
So what? Yeah, how do you? So what? How do we verbalize it? Oh, I want you to look at the camera and screech like an eagle for 5 straight seconds. That's how you pronounce my name.
Then it just feels like some kind of absurdist scavenger hunt.
Yeah, it goes from a guy trying to change his name being highbrow to like a comedian trying to troll the news media.
Anyway, I don't know if this was Elon Musk and his marketing team's deliberate intent, but great success. They have now made themselves the talk of the town inadvertently everywhere all the time. Every news article, every story, everything. People stop what they're doing and point out that the website formerly known as Twitter.
If I'm in the news, I guess it's a year. You give it 1 calendar year, and then you just drop the old name, and it's just X now.
Yeah.
What do you call the... Here's the real question, though, because nobody ever says the name of the company, except we did like 100 times in this conversation. But what do you call the things that are posted on that platform? Because before, it was Twitter, and those were tweets. Now it's X, and what are they called? What's the one-to-one translation? Are they X's? Are they posts?
I feel like this discussion's probably happened a lot, but I've avoided those YouTube videos or TikToks. I'm surprised you haven't run across them.
Well, I mean...
Do you say that you X'd?
Well, I don't think they say it that way.
Xing?
I think they posted... I think it defaults back to the thing that other social platforms do. Because like if you do it on Facebook, it's not a thing. They just call it... They post it on Facebook.
It's a post on X.
It's post on X. But I think they're actually going backwards there. I think it was better in the zeitgeist for them, marketability and all that.
I think so too.
To have
saying
an actual
tweeting.
word, for the posts that are on your platform.
Yeah, I thought so too. I wonder what they did when they sat down and like, all right, we're looking at focus groups and Twitter is not trending well with the below 35 age group, and so
again,
we need to
Occam's
rebrand.
razor. There is no chance they focus group any of that. Twitter.
Oh, come on.
Come on. X, the company formerly known as Twitter is a complete dumpster fire. Like it's just we're just all waiting for it to actually collapse.
But it still fills a niche in society, and that is the proliferation of the internet and mobile devices have made it possible for you to participate in a selective feed of limited amounts of information from individuals that you choose to follow. It's a real easy thing to understand and hard to explain.
Now, hang on. That exists on 100 other platforms, and the only reason
they are the platform of record.
It's just because they started it.
Function.
The only reason Twitter X, formerly known as Twitter, is still standing as a business is because there are way too many old hats in like politics and in government and in business that got onto Twitter, figured it out, and are using it enough that they are unwilling to change to Instagram or Snapchat or whatever the new thing is. There's not going to be a mass migration. So everybody's already on this. I don't want to learn the new thing. That's the only thing keeping that company going.
I know that you weren't trying to give super accurate examples, but the way those two other Instagram and Snapchat function, they don't fill the same niche. I mean, Twitter really carved out a very specific niche of limiting you to text of a very small amount of characters. It contained it and made it something very specific that nothing else really fills that function.
Well, I mean, I can agree with you on that. I mean, there's nothing to compare it to. There's nothing to mass migrate to, unless you're ultra conservative. Then there's Truth Social, I guess. But
and others,
like so there are alternatives out there. But my hypothesis is the only reason Twitter still exists is because people aren't willing to move away from it.
Yeah, I don't know. Does the internet also make us so nimble that we should have to install a new app on our phone every time there's a shift in the technological norms? So here's an example. When I got over here, because we're on a foreign cellular network, a lot of people didn't want to pay like fees to get local service, and so what they do is they just connect to the Wi-Fi and then use an internet messaging app, so they can still use their phones and their contacts to text people, but it doesn't charge them fees as long as they're connected to Wi-Fi. But there's 2 different apps, 3 actually, and not everyone's in agreement, so it's like you have to have all 3 installed on your phone and monitor all 3 of them, and it's super annoying. All
right, you know what? I figured out what we're actually talking about, okay? So, Ben, ever since you've been on the internet, what is the one technology that has persisted across multiple business changes, across social media platforms? What's the one thing that stays the same?
Instant messaging.
Email.
Okay.
Email hasn't changed. And do you know the difference between email and all of these other social media platforms? email is a set of rules that everybody agreed on beforehand. Like it's not a proprietary thing. It's just an accepted standard. Whereas all of the platforms that we're talking about are businesses. Their main incentive is not to provide us with communication. It is to harvest our data that they can sell to advertisers to make money. The incentives there are different.
SMS is kind of like that. And those apps I was talking about just are an alternative to SMS that are able to provide you some benefits that SMS can't. Since cellular companies have a monopoly on SMS, they're like, well, if you install WhatsApp or Signal or GroupMe or Messenger, then you can have this. But then it's platform specific and they don't cross-pollinate. And
what you're looking for is an open source project that translates Wi-Fi to SMS. But they can't do that because at some point, the internet signal on the Wi-Fi has to cross over to the cell network on SMS, and that connection costs money.
Yeah.
So, hey, if you are a rich billionaire listening to our podcast, first of all, sponsor us because we need that. But second of all, like if you want to do the world an actual good, this is a space that you can do. Just pay for a long-standing connection to the SMS data network in whatever country you want, and then stand up an open source SMS translation thing. People can message on the internet, and it goes out on the cell network. That would actually
and now you've democratized text messaging.
You would be able to do that on your computer. You would be able to send SMS messages from a web browser if you had that. That'd be really cool. Like, don't talk to me about iMessage. Don't you come at me with your Apple nonsense.
I didn't. When I text you from my computer, I use Verizon's website, and it's abysmal. I hate it, but sometimes I have to because of the way you and I communicate.
Okay, all right. Yeah. So why don't you just use your text messages on your phone? Because of that cell network thing?
Sometimes, like for instance, hey, listeners, you're going to get a peek behind the Bad at Magic curtain here. Sometimes after you and I finish recording and you're getting ready to send me your audio file, you go through and preview what you're about to send me, and you listen and realize that you told me like 4 things that you want to be in the show notes and images and stuff, and you'll text those to me.
Yes.
And the app and all the storage I do on my computer. So in order to get what you sent me off of text to my computer, I need them up side by side. And the only good way for me to do that is to log into the Verizon website and bring up your SMS feed.
Oh, interesting. Because my Android phone, if I have a link that I open on my phone, I have one button that I can send it to my active desktop device, and then it sends the link into my browser, and I can just open it.
I think Microsoft Edge has a thing that does that, but I just haven't figured it out. It hasn't reached the level. It is not a technology that is sufficiently advanced that it is thus indistinguishable from Magic. So
this is a technology that has existed for Android users for years now. Ben just dropped the iPhone.
I'm not saying it doesn't exist, Josh.
I'm saying this is a problem
it's
for you.
It's hard enough that I haven't bothered to figure it out yet.
I am trying to solve problems for you, my friend. There are so many things that would be better in your life if you were on an Android phone.
There's been a segment on the show it's been on hiatus for a little while. I kind of exhausted the easy well of our Bad at English that we used to do in the early episodes of Bad at Magic. But it reawakened this week, and you put something under the Bad at English heading in our show notes that says, literally the end of me caring about humanity. What in the heck are you talking about?
That note encapsulates everything I need to remember in order to speak intelligently on this topic. So,
okay,
Ben, this hurts me. Like this makes me want to give up on the planet. Like, you know what? You're right. We can't solve any of these problems. We're all doomed. Like, we're going to go the way of the dinosaurs because of this kind of change.
Okay. But you haven't talked about what you're going to talk about yet, but my mind's going crazy trying to imagine what it could potentially be. Is it... I can't. What is it?
Okay, so longtime listeners of this podcast might know, and then everybody that's ever met me in real life knows this for a fact. One of my pet peeves is words mean things, and specifically the difference between literally and figuratively.
Okay.
Because everybody in my life will say literally as just an emphasizer for their sentence. And every time they did, in the past tense, every time they did, I would re-say their expression. Like, oh, I literally couldn't even get out of bed. Like, could you literally not get out of bed or figuratively not get out of bed?
Or you're just trying to give emphasis to it.
Yeah, exactly. And they go, I don't mean literally. I'm like, then why did you say literally? And it turns into this whole thing.
You do that every time?
Every time. I have a shirt. It's such a running gag in my family. As a birthday gift, I was giving a shirt that said, "You literally meant figuratively."
Yes. You know that Weird Al Yankovic made a parody of that.
Yes,
Robin
it's called Word Crimes. I've watched it 100 times,
Crimes.
and I love him.
And he talks about literally.
Yes, because he shows that literally couldn't get out of bed, and he shows a person chained down into their bed so they couldn't get out of it, like literally couldn't get out of it. Like you literally meant figuratively. Anyway, my faith in humanity died when the dictionary updated their definition of the word literally. The secondary definition is now as an emphasis / figuratively. People have used the word literally wrong so much that we have
that it now has a new
redefined
definition.
it, and it has no meaning. It has no meaning. The word literally now means figuratively, and that's it. I'm done. Like, the whole world can just burn. I don't care. Like, you all are just apes on typewriters. Like, it doesn't make any sense anymore.
Josh, this is beautiful. I love it. I had one of these like 2 decades ago, and I had the same outcome as you, and it drove me crazy. And it was so bad that I would correct people whenever they would do it wrong, and then eventually so many people did it wrong for so long that it is now in the dictionary as the wrong way. Okay. It is to mispronounce the word nuclear.
Nuclear.
Very good.
Oh, did I do it wrong?
No, you did it right.
Okay.
Because of the way English language words are pronounced, that particular combination of tongue and mouth movements is difficult for people, and so there's a common linguistic mistake people make when they pronounce it, and sometimes they will say nuclear.
Oh, okay.
Instead of nuclear.
Just say clear and put new in front of it. Nuclear.
Yeah. Well, people have a hard time with that one, but it's derived from the word nucleus, as in the center of an atom. Right. Nuclear, nucleus. Everyone gets it. It's not a nucleus. And so when people pronounce it wrong, it'd be like, it's nuclear, not nuclear. It's not the nucleus of an atom. And I was just persona non grata for saying it. But I looked it up and found other people that cared as much as me about it, and it got changed in the dictionary, Josh. They added it as an alternative pronunciation of the word, even though the letters aren't in the order to make that pronunciation. It cited a social linguistic norm of once something's been pronounced wrong for long enough, it just becomes an accepted definition. And they cited a former president of the United States that always said it the wrong way.
Yeah, that would be George W.
How did you know?
Because that guy couldn't talk to save his life. But nothing against George W., but like, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, well, you can't fool me a second time. He said that in a press conference. It's a video. Go watch it. It's hilarious. But so
okay, but it was the same thing. I cared about it so much, and then they changed the dictionary.
I had a realization as you were telling that story, in that maybe I'm in the wrong here. Maybe I need to grow a little bit. And like, am I gatekeeping English language? Am I being a purist where the progressives are making progress? Like, this is just the most egregious edition of this that I've ever seen. Like, I've never had. I try not to gatekeep. I really do. I try to be open-minded about things, but this is something that was just so in my brain. Like, words are important because, like, we can't. If we degrade the meanings of words, like, it just removes tools from our toolbox in order to take these multifaceted, multidimensional things that are ideas in our head and translate them into verbal spoken language in order for me to take this multifaceted, impossible thing and try to recreate it in your brain. Like, I need as many tools as I can get. This is the same way that I yelled at my dad that you cannot text me in all caps. You are removing so many tools from your toolbox to communicate important information to me.
How long did it take him to get that?
Only a month or two, because like all of his children like said the same thing when I said it. Like, and they're all like, "Yeah, you got to stop doing that." It's like, I just do it so I can read it better. Like, we don't care. You're driving us crazy.
Yeah. Wow. That's a great example of a social norm. We're going to talk about those in a bit. Just to close up the discussion on literally and nuclear.
Literally nuclear.
In the movie Pulp Fiction, there's a discussion that the two gangsters are having, played by John Travolta and Samuel L. Jackson, where they're talking about how in France they don't have quarter pounders with cheese, they have a Royale with cheese. And what that is in French, in the French language in the country of France, they've decided to gatekeep their language very strictly, so much that they have a national committee that approves changes to the language. So they would not approve this change to literally meaning figurative or nuclear being pronounced nuclear. It wouldn't make it past the committee. And because of that, French has been a very inflexible language that has failed to adapt to changes in the times and has made it largely irrelevant. And one of the key characteristics of English is that it accepts alternate pronunciations, other languages, other words from other cultures and languages. It's kind of this eclectic melting pot of language. It makes it difficult to learn. It makes it a bit problematic sometimes, but ultimately I think it's the thing that makes it useful in the world language.
Yes, it does. But Ben, come on. They changed the definition of a word to mean the exact opposite of what the word is supposed to mean. I don't know. It's offensive.
You know that literally is not the only word that has opposite meanings, right?
I know. There's flammable and inflammable mean the same thing, which is ridiculous. They both mean flammable, people. Yes, that sounds ridiculous. Look it up. Like inflammable means flammable.
So what are you reading right now, Josh?
So, Ben, interesting. I just finished one of the Dresden File books not too long ago. I read...
How many are there? I feel like you've been reading these forever.
So, there's two types of fantasy authors, Ben. There's the fantasy author that turns out like one or two books over their entire lifetime and then like redefines the genre and then just fades into the sunset. And then there's the fantasy author that has enough of a following to make a living, but not enough of a following to not write a book every 3 months. And so they just like churn them out. And there's a couple of series that I have that are like that, where the books. All right, so nothing wrong. Nothing
that
against Jim
was
Butcher.
Such a cheeky description, but I loved it.
Nothing against Jim Butcher. Jim, you write
My
books
mind
that
starts
I find...
thinking of them like Piers Anthony and who wrote all the Xanth? No,
that was Piers Anthony. Yeah, that wrote all the Xanth novels. There's a bunch of them. All the Tor books. Go to your library, look at Tor. There's like a whole shelf of one guy just churning out a book every 3 months. Here's the thing. I find these sometimes, and I'm kind of a story snob. Listeners will know that, but this is one of those times where, the story's not like 100% awesome. It's not super high level, but I'm giving it so much leeway because I love the premise so much. That like there are parts in the books that I'm listening to. I'm like, yeah, okay, that's really dumb. Okay, this is a leap. Okay, how are we supposed to know that as the reader? But like, I don't care. It's a wizard in contemporary Chicago fighting sex vampires. Like, I'm not going to be not into this. But that said, the second season of The Wheel of Time just came out on Amazon Prime. Okay.
Oh, all right.
We started watching it, and Ben, like I haven't thought about, I haven't read, I haven't listened to, I haven't consumed any Wheel of Time stuff in like a calendar year. And watching just 40 minutes of an interpretation of the universe that I love so much was like a warm blanket coming over me. And I loved it so much. I've started re-listening to The Wheel of Time. So this segment
Did they fix some of the problems? I didn't make it through the first season. We talked about it on the podcast, and I tried to watch it, but there was a few issues, and I didn't make it.
All right, so I'm going to finish my thought, and then I'm going to address your thought. Okay. I'm going to be listening to The Wheel of Time from now until probably next calendar year. That's how long it's going to take me to get through all the books. So this segment's going to be real boring. But now talking about the Amazon show specifically. At first I was trepidatious when the show first came out and they announced that they were going to do this as an episode. I'm like, there's a lot here. I don't know if they can translate it right from the books very well, and I'm really scared that they're going to mess up my story. But then somebody on Reddit, I read their comment, said, don't think of this as a one-to-one translation from The Wheel of Time to the show from the books. Think of it as another turning of the wheel. Same story, same characters, same premise, new iteration. This is a new spin. So like the elements are all
another turn of the Wheel of Time.
Yes, exactly. This is the coming of the Third Age again after the books have already taken place. So same characters, same story beats, very different story. So I'm enjoying it.
Like you said with Spider-Man having organic webs. Once you realize that there was a multiverse and different versions of Spider-Man, then you're able to let it go.
Exactly. So if they do things that I don't necessarily like, instead of me being mad about it, like, oh, that's not how it was in the books, I get to look at the screen and go, that's an interesting interpretation of that. I like the book's interpretation a little better, but I can see what they did that for.
I try not to just have there be one fatal flaw that just destroys something for me. I forget. Forgive me. You can give the name of the character. I forget, but there's the one character that like turns into the wolf. And early on in the Amazon interpretation of, there's a scene where he's being attacked by somebody, and he like draws back his axe to hit the bad guy, and he accidentally hits his wife in the backswing or something. I don't even remember what it was, but he just accidentally kills her. And then that's his motivation for being dour and down and depressed. And I didn't buy it in the first place, and it didn't work for me, and I was just done.
Okay, so that character is Perrin. And he didn't kill her in the backswing. He was fighting for his life in his forge as these monsters were attacking him, and he went into a blood frenzy. And like he just was killing everything that was moving in front of him. And then when this like haze of bloodlust
and then
lifted,
she pops out.
And he just killed her. And he didn't even realize he'd killed her at first. Like he had to like settle down and his blood to dry up before he was like realized like, oh no, not you. So it's
didn't work for me.
Here's the thing: did you read all of the Wheel of Time books?
No, I know this.
Okay.
Why are you asking me questions you know the answer
I
to?
actually really liked this change in the character because it makes more sense in this version of the story for how they're doing it, because one of Perrin's driving things about this entire time is, yes, he has this like wolf power and magic in him, but he's terrified of it because he doesn't want to lose control of himself. His entire childhood, he has been bigger than all of the other kids, and if he's not careful, he hurts people. And he doesn't want to hurt people. And so he's constantly trying to control himself. And now he has this thing in him that wants to get out and just go bloodlusty berserker crazy. And so it informs his character and the hesitance to embrace this part of himself, which makes perfect sense for that story.
Okay. Well, I'm glad Amazon has provided you a second warm blanket, and you can go back to your favorite fantasy universe. Maybe I'll read some more books in there. I don't know. I'm having a dilemma. So I just finished reading Nothing is True and Everything is Possible: The Surreal Heart of the New Russia by Peter Pomerantsev. And that was
heavy.
Weird.
That seems really heavy.
It was. I mentioned it before. Every chapter was about something new. So like one chapter was about corruption in the government. Another chapter was about corruption in business. Another chapter was about corruption in the media. The last chapter took me for a loop. It was about like these weird corporate training business cults. There was this Russian supermodel that notoriously committed suicide by leaping off an 8-story building in New York. And when they traced her life back, it went to this weird, like, indoctrination thought police cult that she was in. And apparently those are thriving over there in Russia right now. And so then they go into all that. Anyway, all that aside, I don't really recommend that book, but it was interesting. So now the dilemma I have is, because I'm deployed, I brought a bunch of books with me that I intend to read, and there's not a clear winner. So I've got like 6 that I want to read, and maybe you can help me decide. So I have 2 I picked up since I got here that are both memoirs about things I'm interested in. One's called In the Garden of Beasts by Larson. It's about a Jewish family living in Berlin in 1938. That one seems really interesting. The other's called Running with Scissors. It's like a 19th or 20th century memoir. I don't know a lot about it, but it's got some good reviews on the back that show me it's the kind of thing I want. The other 4 are, well, there's also President the Creation by former Secretary of State Dean Acheson under President Truman. Okay, all those aside, now I've got 3. They are Nova by Megan Scamfish, The Paradise Planets by Sean Barrows, and Trina Korea by P.D. Fertitta. All of these are authors that I know personally, that I've collected their books with the intent to read them someday.
Okay.
And there's a principle that I'm trying to nurture in my life. It is like, if I want to write a book or create a podcast and I want to be able to ask someone else to look at it or listen to it or give some of their attention to something I'm created, then if I have a friend that's written a book, I should be willing to read it if I'm going to expect someone else to do that, if I do that.
Yeah, if somebody hands you a book and says, hey, I wrote this, I really value your opinion as a person, please read it and give me feedback, you're kind of obligated to do that.
Yes, but a book is a big commitment. Like this one.
Like a written book, like with words and pages? How slow do you read, sir?
I mean, this book right here has 450 pages. And I like Sean, and I'm sure it's good, but it's just not the kind of thing I would normally read. So I don't know. I don't know how that's going to go.
All right, you're having a duty-desire conflict. You feel a duty to this person, but you desire not to.
You nailed it. So this one, Nova by Megan Scamfish, you can see it's got a nice flamey dragon on the cover. It looks really interesting. This is a girl that runs the cash register at my local game store.
Oh, you have to read that one.
Sell it at my
You're
local
going to see
store.
her every week for... Oh, wait, no, you're not. You're moving.
It's 300 pages, though. I started reading it. It was fine. It just didn't hook me, and now I'm having the duty-desire conflict.
Do you not have, like, an hour in your 36-hour days in the parallel universe that you exist in to, like, read some books?
Listeners, I'm interested to know if you're having this dilemma. When I was a kid, I was the kind of kid that would sit in my bed after my parents told me to turn out the lights with a flashlight and read out of an old-style book for, like, 4 hours. But something about staring at a glowy phone where I can just swipe to the next idea if I'm bored has just ruined my brain, and I have a hard time just staring at a paper page anymore.
Okay, here's your problem, Ben. Modern media has corrupted your attention span. Because like you said, I did the same thing when I was a kid. I could sit down and I could read for hours. So this is almost think of it as twofold. One, you're doing a favor to a friend that asked you to do them a favor. If this was an episode of Letterkenny, I'd say, a man asks you for help, you help him. The second idea is that this is an exercise in rebuilding the endurance of your attention span. Like, recognize when your mind is drifting, be like, no, we're doing a thing. We're going to get better. Like, this is iterative improvement. Because, I mean, this really is a skill nowadays to be able to sit in one spot and focus on one thing for longer than 10 minutes because modern society is cultivating this short attention span. They want this short attention span because that's how they keep us distracted with all the things they want us to look at instead of the stuff that we should be looking at.
What was the last hard copy book you read?
What's it called? The monk book that I was reading from the Pieces Every Step.
That was like last month.
Yeah, that was a paper book.
So your wife handed you this book and you read the whole thing.
My wife now has a stack of paper books written by various Eastern philosophers that are on my reading list, yes.
Okay. So here's the problem I have, and I know you do too. Like when you ask me to read one of the Wheel of Time books, it's like 26-hour runtime, but I can just put it on and go for a run and clean my room or do something. I can multitask. And then if my mind wanders a little bit, I didn't stop reading.
You can drift in and out like you're doing other things. Yeah, I get that.
And I can press through to the end. I keep making progress. But man, if I'm trying to read a hard copy book and it's not capturing my attention, and I read the same line 10 times, then it's paralyzing.
You lost the magic. There was something about books when you were a kid that drove you to read them for 4 hours after dark and like sacrifice sleep. Well, one, when you're a kid, sleep is easy to sacrifice. But what was the magic? Where's the whimsy? Where did it go, Ben?
So part of it is that I feel like I've learned to read the code in the Matrix.
Yeah, you've
like
said
if
that.
I'm reading a fantasy novel and I start to recognize the plot notes and the themes and stuff like that, and I can kind of see where it's going, it's because I've spent all that time reading all those books that I can do that, and now I get distracted.
Does that bother you when you see movies? I asked that question, but I already know the answer. Yes, it does. You sit in a movie theater and you're just waiting for the shoe to drop or whatever. It's like,
you're waiting for him to pull out Chekhov's gun.
All right, Cisco and Ebert. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, if you can't turn that part of your brain off, you're just not going to enjoy any form of media.
But here's the thing. A movie is a lot more distilled of an experience. It's only a 2-hour commitment. And there's a lot more going on. I can enjoy the stunt work or the visual effects or the sound design or the set or the costumes or those kinds of things. But with the book, it's just printed words on a page. I'm on a journey with an author. And if I'm not on board because either I recognize what they're doing and it's not interesting me, or like, for instance, Sherlock Holmes style books. Like they like to set up their protagonist as this brilliant puzzle solver, and then they set up a row of dominoes for him to knock down, and we're supposed to be impressed.
Well, now to be fair, a good detective novel actually like lines the dominoes up in a way that you can see them, so you as the reader have every opportunity to connect the same dots that the protagonist
did.
did.
And there's a masterful way to do that, but it doesn't.
I'm not big on detective novels
work
either,
for me,
honestly. Like just because you're like you put together all these things. Like a lot of this is I listen to the Dresden Files, and there's like every time there he has that moment where he. Somehow he's in a situation where he gets to like articulate to another person all of the logical steps that solve the mystery, and like 3 or 4 of those steps are always like I don't know, that's circumstantial at best and an enormous logical leap. You're gonna be really lucky if it actually works out that way.
Yeah. Anyway, I'll let you know what I pick. These books keep staring at me and taunting me. I want to at least have read one or two of them by the time I'm done here.
I feel like I don't know why we're so different in this respect, but I just love science fiction and fantasy. I love things that aren't real fiction. And
I have one fantasy book and one science fiction book.
Something about fiction just really draws me, and I just love the story. And like, even if I know the beats, even if I can feel the switcheroo or the backstab, the betrayal, the love interest dying or whatever, I can feel the story beats coming. It's still, I don't know, I just still like it.
What does that for me anymore is memoirs, because these are the stories of what happened in someone's life, and I can't predict what's going to happen next.
How are you the nuclear our person and I'm the accountant? Like, our personalities are not this way.
All right, well, there's something we've been hinting at all along, and I think it's time that we actually start to talk about it. So I'm going to start by asking you a question, Josh. Okay. You have 2 children. Which of those 2 children is your favorite?
Ben, you don't. All right, so Carter is my favorite son, and Jane is my favorite daughter.
Thank you for that non-answer. It perfectly illustrates my point. What we're going to talk about is taboos, or social norms. Things that we have a social custom prohibiting or restricting, words, vocabulary, things to talk about, behaviors to do, relationships. Why do we have them? Are they good or bad? Let's talk.
Okay, Ben, what you just said reminded me of one of my favorite comics that I've read ever, and I'm going to send you a link here, and I want you to take a look. This is a comic by Senior Grafo, Srgrafo, and it's a 4-panel comic, and it's 2 children and a mom. And one child says, "Mom, who is your favorite?" And the mom looks at her and says, "Sweetie, I love you both equally." And then that child goes off, presumably to play, and the mother turns to the other child with the squinty mean eyes and like whispers in his ear, "It's you, and by a lot."
And this is fun. So there's lots of ways to analyze humor, but this particular comic is really funny because it breaks social norms. In the first 3 panels, they all have very normal facial expressions and look very generic human-y things. They're almost stick figures. But in the last panel, her eyes get really expressive, and it shows that she's breaking a social norm and keeping a secret. The secret is that parents actually do have favorites.
I don't think I only have
Josh,
2, so
Josh,
it's a bad
hang on. I want to set
size.
up a rule here.
Okay.
We're not going to talk about that. I'm not. The point of this discussion is not for me to paint you into a corner and try to get you to tell me which kid is your favorite. I'm not even going to make you admit that you have a favorite. It's okay. They're both your favorites. You love them both equally. I get it. I love all my kids equally too.
Because I love them both differently.
Yes, whatever we want to call it, we're adhering to a social norm that we've agreed on that has value. So let's talk about the value of the social norm. What's happening under the hood?
You're asking the meta question. You asked that question
Yes.
as an example of a larger thing that you want to talk about, and that is the things that everybody knows but we don't talk about.
Right.
Okay. Like you have you have that overweight coworker that's constantly complaining about health issues, and you're just over here like, "Oh, that sounds terrible for you."
Yeah, that must be really hard. What can I do to help?
Oh, you're not sleeping well? Oh, and you don't feel well after you eat 3 cheese pizzas for lunch? Oh, interesting. Wow, that must be terrible.
Right.
I wonder what it could be.
So we have social norms about these things. Why do they exist? Why do we do them that way? Okay, so let's go back to the favorite kid one.
Okay.
As human beings, we are naturally imbued with, whether it's genetically or behaviorally, preferences for things. Like you talk about a lot of the time, there's a weighted average that happens whenever something happens. We just talked about why I like memoirs and nonfiction and you like fantasy. We're wired differently and we have preferences because of those things. How would that not apply to every aspect of our life? The food that we eat, the shows that we like to watch, the places that we like to go, what our sleep habits are like. Of course, it's going to also mean that we're going to have preferences in human beings, even ones that we've created. However,
you're like there. All right, so I don't. Yes,
when you're dealing with dependent,
I've got a lot here.
when you're dealing with dependent human beings, there's also a stewardship that you have as an adult that brought them into the world that is, they're not mature enough yet to understand everything I just said in a way that would be meaningful to them and not just give them crushing depression or a complex. And so we have this justifiable agreement as a society to not transmit our preferences in human beings to ones that we gave birth to. And to do that is a crappy thing to do. There are societies that do it. There are cultures in the past that have done it. But we've agreed in our society, in our time, that we are not going to do that. We're not going to transmit as a parent to our children our preferences for them.
So I think I've mentioned on this podcast that I struggled in my young life, like interacting with other people because I didn't understand the rules. And like I would trip over these unspoken social contracts that I didn't know about yet or hadn't articulated to myself in my brain to codify to change the way that I interact with the world. And so in my cumulative 40 years now of interacting with this world, in a world that doesn't make much sense to me a lot of times, I've had to construct this artificial idea and this filter for how I am supposed to interact with other people. And it's important for a number of reasons. The first one that's external to me is that these are kind of the unspoken rules we all agree to maintain a civil society. And that's the civil thing is important. Like if we all said the things that we were thinking all the time, there would be a lot more violent crime that happened.
Yes.
Now
I love it.
The internal portion, the internal reflection of that is the handful of times where I break the social contract with trusted people in my inner circle, people that I think like, oh, this is what I really think and why. For example, I was in a situation not too long ago with close family members that we were in the situation together, and then in a separate setting that was just close family, they brought it up. It's like, oh, your behavior there was odd. Can you tell me a little bit about that? And then I told them why I behaved the way that I did. And the look that I got of confusion and weirdness and outrage, like, why would any human being think that way? And I'm over here just like, that's how I think. Please stop judging me. Like, it just, okay. So that's protecting me now. If like, there's just this mask that I put on to protect my feelings, because if you know what I was actually thinking, you'd think I was a crazy person.
So this idea of social norms has such great depth that it's an entire field of study in sociology. And it has life cycle and mechanisms and returns and all of these aspects that describe it. And what you were just talking about there is several of them. One is that we have ways that we transmit them to people. Some of them are formal and coordinated, like we'll put it in textbooks and make it and hang signs on the wall that say the things. Some of it is given through social pressure, and some is subtle as just gentle signaling, like someone just trying to give you a look, like their eyes get wide, or they look at you out of the corner, or they clear their throat, or they shuffle their feet. These are all ways that we transmit these social norms.
You've done this to me. You've done this to me a bunch of times in this podcast, where I sit here and I lay out my heart. Like in 40 years in the school of hard knocks, these are the lessons I've learned and the scars that I carry for messing it up. And you're like, oh yeah, this is a whole field of study. There's a book that you could have read that tells you all of this stuff. Why? Where were you when I was growing up, Ben? Why couldn't you hand me a book like, oh, here's all the unspoken social contracts you need to internalize?
The book is just being about all these mechanisms. It's not a list of the result of all of it. That's the problem. Like what I just described about not telling your children which one is your favorite. Do you think you could find that anywhere in a book?
Probably. I mean, that's probably on a website somewhere. Hey, by the way, rules for parenting, don't tell your kid which one is the favorite.
Maybe. Would it be a book that would come across an average child's reading list before they reach the age of 20?
So I have to believe that there has to be some kind of educational pamphlet for the people on the autism spectrum that are way worse than me, that just don't pick up on these social cues naturally. There has to be these written down somewhere. I
had a bad at parenting moment where I had one of my children kind of in their young years, as they were starting to grow up, started to try to exert some influence over their siblings, boss them around and stuff. And my wife and I both made the false assumption that they were just a bully and being mean. And when someone suggested to us that individual was on the autism spectrum, and then I analyzed the situation as maybe there's someone that isn't picking up on the social cues and gave them things to look out for and rules to follow, it instantly fixed the behavior. And instead of thinking they were a mean person or a bad person, I realized they just didn't understand the social cues. And once I gave them a set of rules to follow, then they were able to navigate the situation.
Again, where were you when I was growing up, Ben? I knew these rules.
So when I would see that same template kind of happen, oh no, they're not understanding the situation and they're choosing the wrong set of behaviors, I would just be explicit about explaining it and it would correct it.
Why would you? All right, you're doing the thing. You're assuming malice over ignorance. You always assume ignorance before malice.
Sure, I'm sure you never do that. So,
got me on that one.
The life cycle of a social norm is that, at least for the ones that we make a deliberate decision, and they can happen on a micro level within a family or a social group, they can happen in a community, in a society, or even globally. We come to some agreement or somebody tries to force an issue and change something. Think of whatever it is you want. Like for instance, the idea of allowing an individual to choose their own pronouns. You know, that was maybe anathema, pariah a decade or two ago, and now it's relatively normal. I see it in signature blocks at work, and I don't have a problem changing pronouns if somebody asks me to do that. So there's this emergence, and then there's a cascade that happens where the ideas tip and reach broad acceptance, and then they start to become internalized to the point where you take them for granted. You don't even remember where you learned it from. It just becomes part of the new society. And maybe at some point in the future, they become stale or irrelevant, and then they become abandoned.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
You can see this if you do like a Google search where it shows the incidence over times of like certain vocabulary words. Like say you pick a word that means something is really great or socially acceptable, like cool. You know, if you can
boss.
look at the frequent...
That's
boss.
Hip.
Great
That's
example.
Jive.
Hip, jive.
That's bussin'.
Rad. The bomb. All these are words that if you look, you can see there was a time where like somebody was trying to make it happen. Fetch. But somebody's trying to make it happen, and then it tipped and it happened. And it reached a point of maximum acceptance where it was used in society and actually had the desired effect. And then maybe it started to go and decline to the point where it either has the opposite effect now or isn't in use anymore. So that's a vocabulary example. Bad words have that, swear words, cuss words, whatever you want to call them, have that too. There's some that kind of have a steady use over time. There's some that reach height or maybe have different meaning in different societies. These are all social norms, and it's really complex. Like if you tried to write all this down, this book is massive.
I think she's 26. She's a 26-year-old person that works for us. She's our marketing client relations person. She answers the phones, and she's constantly helping me update my vocabulary because she'll say things to me in the new vernacular of the younger generation. And I feel like this is the first time. I used to be on the other side of this where I'm replacing words that my parents used in, pop culture. But now it's being done to me, and I don't like it.
The hip young... I love this description of this role. Can you think of any that she's corrected you on recently?
Well, most of the time it's me asking her questions because she'll, we'll have our Monday meeting, like, on teleconference, and then part of that is dedicated to just water cooler talk. Like, specifically, it's on the agenda because we're virtual and we need to be a team, and so we have to feel like we're connected to these other people. I don't, but they do, apparently. So I said something like, and then this thing happened. And then she goes, spill the tea. And I just stopped dead. I'm like, I'm actually drinking coffee and I don't want to spill it where I'm at. And then she laughed at me and then explained to all three of us older people, that's not what spill the tea means. Apparently spill the tea is a common expression for tell me the details of the thing that you just said.
Okay, we used to say spill the beans.
And maybe
no one knew what the beans were, but yeah, if to spill the beans means to give up a secret, and so if you ask someone to spill the beans, it means give up your secrets.
Right. She's given me a couple others, and I'm sure I don't use them right.
There was one you gave to me not too long ago. You used the term smoke show, and I was like, okay, from the context of what we're talking about, I think I know what that means, but I've never heard that used before. Maybe
I don't think that's a new
thing.
one. I think that's been around.
Okay, so I looked it up, and it has been around, but not that long. It's only recently kind of tipped. And
careful, Ben. You are now communicating on the podcast that you and I were discussing someone that I at least thought was a smoke show.
Well, obviously we were talking about our wives, and so I was trying to figure out what this meant or what you were talking about. So I went and looked it up, and yeah, that's what it means, and now I know. And then I've heard it a few times since then, and I was like, okay, now I get that. But before it would have just seemed counterintuitive because it doesn't. That one was a bit counterintuitive to me. Are you familiar with the Dr. Seuss classic short story, The Sneetches?
The Sneetches, yes. The Sneetches lived on the beaches, and there was some marketing vendor that showed up and then just used the idea of what's popular or what's cool to fleece them for everything they owned.
Okay, good. You kind of skipped right to the heart of it, but there was more than one thing going on in there. So you have the Sneetches without stars on their bellies and the Sneetches with stars on their bellies. And so then you had the one, when it tipped, then the ones with stars on their bellies were the cool ones and the ones without weren't, and they were pointing it and everyone wanted to fix. So then the guy shows up and sells stars on the bellies to the ones that don't have it. But then so many get stars on their bellies that you can't tell who's who anymore. And so then taking them off is the cool thing. And all of a sudden everybody's running in circles, putting the stars on and taking the stars off. And the only person that wins is the guy in the middle collecting the money for putting them on and taking them off.
You realize that's a very thinly veiled analogy for capitalism, right? You got real quiet there, listeners.
Is it?
It is. It absolutely is.
You could say it's a thinly veiled analogy for divorce attorneys.
That's the thing. That's why it's an aggregated. Like, we can use the Sneetches to point at anything that's in our society and be like, oh, the cool thing, you have to own a house, which means you have to go into debt to own this house. Like,
but if you abstract away the guy that's capitalizing on all of it, who's just going to make money no matter what, then you also still have the things that where there are people who are popular and they're pointing at the people that aren't popular and those people want to get. And I was listening to another podcast, and there is evidence that this psychological phenomenon is at an all-time high because of how social media has made it so easy to make people appear unrealistic and make people feel bad about not looking like them.
Yeah, this is the biggest problem with social media, is that it's given everybody a platform, and very few people deserve to have a platform. And I'm included in that. Like, my ideas are not cool enough to have a platform.
Not just a platform, but a distorted platform.
Yes, because then you get echo chamber effect, and then you get the totem making effect. Yeah, there's all of these weird things that are happening where most people on social media arguing about another group are not even talking to people of that other group. They're talking to people of their same like mind about the other group and creating this fictitious, ultra terrible version of the other group, and that's what they talk about instead of the actual other group.
But I'm talking about a really distorted platform. I'm talking about filters, post-production, plastic surgery, fake sets. I mean, like, really distorted platform.
Oh, then throw in a little bit of AI content curation to make sure that you're only getting stuff that you want to see, and it's really easy to control what everybody thinks.
And then you end up in this really toxic psychological space where you just feel bad about yourself all the time.
And you're running into the machine to get the star, and then running out, and then getting into the machine to remove the star. And the only person that's making the money is Facebook, who's selling the stars.
Perfect. Well said. So there's an old maxim, to get old-fashioned on you for a sec, that says there are two things you should never talk about in polite company: religion and politics.
There's more than that. There was always four things.
That was the original version.
Okay.
There's other versions that add money and sex, but whatever it is, there's this idea that if you're having polite company, there are certain topics that to talk about them will just inadvertently or necessarily wade into forbidden waters and create an uncomfortable situation. So if you're trying to keep it polite, you should avoid those topics.
Do you know what's interesting? While we're talking about this, I've actually heard that you shouldn't talk about money amongst your friends, your family, or your coworkers. I've heard that this is an artificial idea that was inserted into our mindset. This is a conspiracy theory.
Back to the Sneetches, it's the guy in the middle with the money.
Yes, I have heard, again, it's a conspiracy theory. I'm not lending it a ton of credit, but there's some merit to this idea that it's the only person that benefits from employees not talking about what everybody else gets paid is the person that's paying all the employees.
Yeah. I don't know. I think there's some... there are some societal aspects that are beyond the control of business owners. Like, they don't get to just decide the zeitgeist and the social norms and be like, no, don't talk about what you're getting paid. Like, there's people have personal reasons that don't have anything to do with that, why they don't want to talk about their salary in front of other people.
If you're talking to your friends, especially people that don't work in the same building with the same supervisor that you do, then all that happens is then it becomes a social thing where now you're like, you get to rack and stack each other. Instead of having this platform of assumed mutual understanding and respect and equality, like, oh, I found out Gary makes 3 times as much money as I do, and I think he's an idiot. That disparity in your brain will impact how you interact with Gary.
Yeah, and affect your work.
Yeah, probably.
Which is why they've decided the easiest way, maybe it's not the best thing, but the easiest way to deal with that is just make it a taboo and never talk about it, and then we've compartmentalized that problem.
Oh, money. You just make everything worse.
So coming to a new country where you're going to potentially be interacting with foreign nationals from a very different cultural background than the one that you're from, there's a little bit of trepidation and some deliberate education on the part of the government to us to be like, all right, you guys are going to go off base. You're going to interact with people of conservative, Arabic, Muslim background. Here are the do's and don'ts. And they'll give us a list. The women are supposed to cover up their hair, and we're not supposed to have visible tattoos or short shorts or, revealing clothing or those kinds of things that are understandable and kind of well understood. But then there's weird ones that are like the corner cases. So just this week, we have an Arabic interpreter that comes to all of our meetings, and there was this cultural thing happening where our chaplain would give a 1-minute motivational speech at the beginning of our meeting each week. He'd stand up, say something very generic and non-denominational to inspire everyone.
I hate chaplains in the military. That's an entirely different topic. That guy had no business being in that room at all.
If you want to get derailed, I'm happy to do that, but if you want to talk about chaplains in the military, we can talk about chaplains in the military.
For 5 seconds, maybe, please, because what purpose does the person serve? What purpose is the chaplain in the operational meeting? What purpose is he serving? None whatsoever. He has nothing to add to that conversation. He runs the chapel. He makes sure that spiritual needs of the diverse set of culturally different troops that are in that command are being supported. He has nothing to say about the actual operations of the military. Why is he there?
Did you want to answer, or you just want a chance to rant?
That was just me ranting. If you have an answer, okay. I would love to tear it down.
Yeah, I have an answer.
Okay.
So the chaplain career field is interesting in that they seem to have 2 purposes. One is their mission, and the other is to defend their existence. And more so than any other career field, they spend a lot of time doing that second one.
So that right there, like if 50% of your job is making sure that is telling everybody that my job is valuable, it's not inherently. Obviously, if it's not valued enough to stand on its own and you have to champion it constantly, then you shouldn't have that job.
So I sit in a seat where I see the chaplain a lot and what they do, and I see the people that are coming in and out of the commander's office and what their focus are. And if I'm a commander and I have people that are focused on conducting discipline, understanding the law, executing the operations, to me, the chaplain is my one person on my staff that has 100% confidentiality and is focused on the well-being of the troops. And I see our chaplain fulfilling that function, and it's a valuable function.
I agree with you. The needs of the troops, it makes the chaplain a necessary function. What I said was he had no right being in the room talking about military operational readiness.
Oh, anyway, sorry if I think I gave you the wrong impression of what the meeting was. This is just like our weekly coalition staff meeting where we talk about the weather, what activities are happening on the base, those kinds of things. Oh, okay.
It's just a check-in with everybody.
Yeah, so everybody's
then why does the chaplain get to stand up and give a 1-minute motivational thing instead of the weather guy?
The weather guy does too. Anyway, the chaplain gets up and says his motivational thing, and he's a good chaplain. Like he's a very good public speaker. The things he says are very engaging and interesting, well prepared. He's really good at his job. And a few of the guys in the room had decided that they liked it so much that they wanted to show some form of appreciation, but applause felt over the top, and so they started doing a round of snaps like you would do in like a jazz bar.
Oh Lord, yeah, that's just so lame.
It started to there's another cultural aspect to this I don't want to get into, but it started to catch on, and then in a separate meeting, our interpreter finally stands up, and he's Arabic a background, but speaks very good English, and he does, translation, interpretation for our interactions with the Arabs. And he finally confesses to us that to Arabs, to snap at people in public is very offensive.
Oh, okay. Perfect. That's exactly what the chaplain deserves.
So he was transmitting to us his offense in the fact that we were showing appreciation to the chaplain by snapping. Now, I think this is a good example for him that he needed to open his cultural understanding a little bit instead of just telling us. But I guess he didn't want us. Maybe he thought we would go off base and snap at people. That he misread the situation. Anyway, it made me realize there was this whole group of things that you got to watch out for when you're in a foreign country or culture that you're not familiar with, where you haven't had time to assimilate all these social norms. So, there's hand shapes you can't make, ways you sit, what they drive like, how to interact with someone when you're passing through a doorway, whether or not it's appropriate to make eye contact. I mean, all these subtle things that it's so easy to get wrong in so many different ways all the time that it just take time to assimilate unless someone gives you a lesson, and even then you're probably going to get it wrong.
I love that you guys are going so far out of your way to respect the cultural norms of the host nation that you're in. I have a firsthand example of how that doesn't happen in other places. Here's a great example. When I was deployed in Afghanistan back in the day, they had not only the main base where I was at most of the time, they had this tiny little fire base up in the mountains. And that's because the Army never gives up ground. And so they just owned this terrible little spot that everyone hated, but they weren't going to give it back up, so they just stayed there forever. And I went up there and I stayed there for a few days. And they
stayed there forever until 2021.
They stayed there forever until we left the entire country altogether. Yes, correct. You're right. Thank you. An important footnote. I was up there for a couple of days during Ramadan. And whereas the main base has, colonels and upper echelon leadership, this little fire base had nothing over a captain. And the captain rotated all the time. That was in charge of this whole thing. And it was during Ramadan, which classically in the Muslim community, you're not supposed to eat between the hours of sunrise and sunset. No eating, no drinking. It's like a fasting religious thing. I'm sure I'm missing the cultural significance of it. That's the rules that I was told.
You got the mechanics right.
Don't eat or drink in front of the locals because they can't, and it's they're observing a holiday, and it just reinforces the fact that you don't care about their beliefs. But I was up there, and it was the middle of the day, and all of his guys are sitting around.
I've never heard
lunch.
A Muslim say that. Yeah, there's this thing, it's called toxic gatekeeping, where people assume something's offensive to another culture and then they make rules about it amongst homogenous people that aren't of that culture, but no one ever thought to ask them. Did they tell you that?
Well, let me finish my story.
Okay.
It's the middle of the day. All the Army guys are just sitting around eating MREs, which are good. They're yummy sometimes. They're eating the pound cake and swapping things like you do. And then there are foreign nationals that are contractors on the base doing work. And then the interpreter comes over to the captain and is like, hey, can you tell your guys not to eat in front of us? It's Ramadan. None of us have eaten or drank anything all day. And what was supposed to happen, the captain's like, oh, I'm so sorry. I apologize for infringing upon your religious beliefs, and then tell all of his guys to go somewhere else or go eat inside the tents or something. What this captain chose to do is lay into the interpreter at maximum volume and just put him back in what he thought was the correct place. Meanwhile, this is an Army captain, me, the Air Force lieutenant off to the side, whew, I'll tell you what, if anybody of any significance was around, this is a huge cultural thing that you should not be doing. You'd probably get in a lot of trouble for it. But since you're the guy here, I guess you get away with it. Okay,
alternate plot twist. Maybe he handled it perfectly. Maybe that was what an elder would do down in their village when someone of lower station challenged them for something that they considered to be bad behavior, and he handled it perfectly and put those and set the situation right.
So we're going to take the cultural, not appropriation, but the cultural norms to the extreme and be like, oh, the people that are in charge abuse and profit off of the labor of the younger ones. Oh, well, then that's what we're going to do. We're going to roll in here in a way that makes sense. And then 6 months later, we are the Taliban, Ben. The ideas were supposed to be better than that.
Yeah. I'll never forget the time I was teaching middle school and I was describing something. It was very culturally relevant. So I don't think I'm defending it and I haven't even said it yet. I used the word Jews to describe people of ethnic Jewish descent. And one of my middle schoolers said, "Mr. Rich, you can't say that word."
That's one of those. I've never been comfortable with any mass descriptor of an ethnic people besides white people. Like, I'm allowed to say white people because I'm white. Everything else is, I'm always looking for and asking somebody, what is the culturally acceptable term right now for your ethnic group?
So I've had friends that are of Jewish descent, and I grew up reading the Bible and the Old Testament, and I just feel very comfortable with that particular one. That's the word they use, and it's not like the N word that they only use it, but you're not allowed to use it. It's just a word you can use. But I was interested that my student had somehow been transmitted this linguistic dead end. Like, okay, how do we talk about these people then?
People of Jewish descent. Obviously, Ben, you just default to the more formal.
Yeah, okay. So when I got to Italy, I was trying to do this. I don't have anything else to say about that. When I got to Italy, I was trying to do this. So I was studying Italian, learning language, and I did something that I thought would be the right way to make a social norm jump. And that is, when this situation arises, here's what we say. So I need to learn the words for that in Italian, and then when that situation arises, I use the Italian words instead of the English words for it. In this situation, it was if you're in like public and you needed to get past someone like at the grocery store or in a line or something, and you say, "Excuse me."
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I learned the words to say it in Italian. In this case, it's "mi scusi." It's a formal version of that. But the assumption I made that I didn't realize I'd made is that Italians would use those words in that situation, and they don't.
What situation do Italians use the word scusi? Is it only when they make like bodily functions? Like, that'd be so delicious.
Yes, but if you bump into someone on a subway or you need to get past them in the store, Italians do not say those words. They don't say any words. They don't do what we do in America, where we say "excuse me." So when I would say that to them, they would always look at me funny, and I was finally like, am I saying the wrong word? So I went to my Italian interpreter and asked her, and she's like, "No, why would you say it in that situation?"
Do you know what's funny is I just recently saw a TikTok. Yes, I'm sorry, I'm still on TikTok, where it was 3 African American people talking to each other about stupid things that white people say. And one of them was like, "Oh, well, whenever a white person tries to get past you and they say something dumb," and I'm like, "Wait, what? Is that something that?"
Oh no!
They're like, "Well, let me just squeeze past you," and I'm like, "I've said that a bunch of times." Or like, "Oh, just excuse me here real quick," and like they said all the things that I say all the time when I'm trying to squeeze past people in crowded situations. Am I the only? Now I'm worried. Like, I thought that was the polite thing to do, but apparently it's specific to white people in America.
Some ways these things can become so circular that you can't win. My preferred way of doing that is just to move through as quickly as possible and not say anything. That I'm not talking to them, I'm not disrupting verbally, but to someone that might be the rudest possible thing you could do. You just can't win.
So what you do is you default to the Fight Club version, like where you stand up and you're squeeze past the person and you start talking to them. Now a question of etiquette: do I give you my crotch or my butt?
I've written down intrusive thoughts. This is one that, like, anytime in a situation you could just have something wild cross your mind, and there's you know, or hope you know, most of the time it's not appropriate to say or do those kinds of things.
So this is an interesting one because this term I feel like is relatively new. The term intrusive thoughts is I feel like this is another one of those things that just millennials just have and we just live with, and then the Gen Z comes along, points at it like, no, that's its own thing and it's different. You should deal with that separately. And we just kind of rolled up in the bag of, well, this is what life is like, and these are the thoughts that you have that are bad. These are the things that
bad. Yeah, exactly. The taboos, the social norms, to do something that's outside of the normal realm of the boundaries that we've learned to stay inside of.
I think about this all the time. There are times like you and I off record were talking earlier about going to the bank. I used to have to go to the bank all the time because I would deposit checks from the business that I ran. And I remember be standing in the line for the teller and looking around and going like, I could rob this place so easy. Like, there's that camera, there's that camera. Just lock the doors.
Yes, that's a great example, because of course you would never do that. But to even think it is almost a crime, and to say it out loud would definitely get you a lot of scrutiny and attention that you wouldn't want.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Okay.
There was now let's make a clear delineation with intrusive thoughts, though, because I remember there was a conversation. I was at my parents' house. We're having some kind of get together, and then they were talking about a cruise. My parents had gone on a cruise, and my mom said, it's like, oh, we got to be careful around Tim whenever he gets to like the high places towards the balcony because I'm like, know what? He goes, and my dad goes, well, sometimes, and it's weird, and I don't know why, but if I'm standing over like a big cliff or like a long drop or like a big hole or something, I always think to myself, just jump. Just jump in. And so I stopped them like, oh, well, one, that's an intrusive thought. Everybody has intrusive thoughts. And two, specifically that one has a name. That's the call of the void. That's a well-documented phenomenon that like a person in a situation where you could take your own life has the thought or maybe even a small desire to do that. That's a real thing that a lot of people experience. And then my dad... It's also an intrusive thought, and my dad was floored by the fact that other people think the same way that he did. He thought he was broken in some way because of the social taboo of never talking about it.
So then you don't know that other people have the same thing and it has a name.
Yes. Huh? Just the way that you did to me earlier on the podcast, like, I have suffered the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune to learn these lessons. Like, dude, that's all written down in a book. Why didn't you just check it out from the library?
Yeah. Well, we have different ways of dealing with these, like you mentioned. Like, for instance, if someone brought up the Call of the Void and it was in the wrong company, like, that could turn into, like, an intervention. Like, they could commit you to a hospital and say you're suicidal against your will.
Yes, if people didn't understand that was a normal thing that some people experience, like, they could get really freaked out by it, yeah.
There's 4 main mechanisms that are used for these social norms. There's coordination, social pressure, signaling, and focal points. And some of these are deliberate, and some of them happen kind of naturally. You know, like some norms we write down and teach the kids in a textbook, and some you couldn't find in a textbook anywhere. They're just out there, and you just kind of got to pick them up. And for
you just
people
got
that aren't
to trip
good at
over them enough times
don't.
Until they hurt you bad enough that you then put it in your own brain.
Yeah. And you know, some of them you can just kind of cluelessly carry on your own way and it doesn't matter because there's also intensity associated with these. There's some that we care about a lot and it can be really, really intense. And there's some that people are mostly indifferent about. One example that comes to mind is like back in biblical times, there were heavy taboos about blasphemy to include the death penalty. Like, you could be walking down the street, say a word, and get stoned by 100 people. You know, like, have them throw rocks at you until you're dead, just because you said the wrong word. Can you think of a word you could say in today's society that would have people kill you on the spot? There's not many.
They're context dependent. I can think of some, and depending on and where you were, like there's words you can say in some company that gets uproarious laughter, and then you're the life of the party for the rest of the night. And then that same thing in a different scenario gets you killed on the spot. Yeah. I think this is why those words persist, is because there is that tiny % of high upside for saying them.
The comedian Louis C.K., persona non grata that he is.
Whoa!
Persona non grata that he is.
We are going to get demonetized. You need to tread carefully, sir.
See, you're doing it. You're giving me social cues.
This is me. This is always me that has to, like, whoa, Ben, like, reel it in, buddy. Like, this is not something.
He has this routine that he calls "of course, but maybe," and he's playing off this dynamic that we have in our society where we're aware of these norms of the things you don't say. So I'm going to give one of the tamer ones that he does in this routine. I'll put a link in the show notes if you want to listen to the whole thing. But he talks about nut allergies. He's like, of course, if children have nut allergies, we should do everything we can to protect them. We should ban nuts from the cafeteria. We should check to make sure that no one has nuts in anything that they bring along. Of course. But maybe if we just stop paying attention to this for like 24 hours, the problem would be completely resolved forever. And the reason that works as a joke is it's playing off the fact that you don't ever say things like that. Like, that's what it makes people uncomfortable and laugh. And it's kind of a brilliant acknowledgement by a comedian about these norms in our society.
Okay, so we have to talk about this whole thing for a second. So let's take a time out for the rest of the conversation and talk about Louis C.K. saying that thing. And yes, you did give a tamer example of one of the things that he mentioned, and we can laugh about it now because society is so careful with nut allergies and because we don't want anybody to die for nuts. But like that, the problem is that mode of thinking can be used, like it can be dialed up to 11 and be extremely hateful extremely quickly. Not only can it become hateful, but then it can become the justification for the actions that you're not supposed to do.
I agree. And as soon as you said that, that brought to mind a whole bunch of really toxic things that people do and say that are just very insensitive and don't show respect for people in need. I totally agree.
Like this is the problem when, like, this is why I get all trepidatious and tingly when you start talking about like Louis C.K. specifically, because like you correctly pointed out, that's part of his shtick, is he's really treading that line of comedy versus genuinely scary thoughts that we don't want to permeate in normal society. Yeah. Because like I feel like you can take that exact same mentality and it's applied directly to like the mission statement on every white supremacist website on the planet right now, and it's
agreed.
Terrifying.
So let's talk about this. What do we do as a society to try to control these things that we consider to be unacceptable? What are the mechanisms that we have?
Well, me as the big government and the rules guy, I like to say that we try to codify a lot of this into legislation. We have laws against discrimination. We have laws that prevent a business or a company from excluding certain people or classes or genders or self-identifying traits.
There's so many ways to do it. So you've got, Fair Housing Act, and you've got free speech, and you've got employment laws, and all these kinds of ways that we're trying to protect.
And everybody, like, it hurts me when I hear people talking about like, oh, these laws are hurting business. But then like my counter argument is always, without these laws, like the reason we have an anti-discrimination law is because, shockingly, like I don't care what you think, discrimination is a real thing. Without it, it would happen.
So in the sociology text I was reading, there's 3 types of ways that we enforce these. There's regulative, where we actually codify laws and write them down and just make it a law. There's constitutive, where there's this mechanism happening that creates new actors, interests, and categories of action. Think of like what's cool. Like, we're not going to write a law down about what's cool. It just kind of happens. And we're like, oh, the cool person right now is The Rock or whatever. And then there's evaluative or prescriptive. You shouldn't ought to do that. That's not how things are done here.
Yes. And that one's very cultural.
Yeah. And then once all that's in place and we have these norms of behavior, then we have penalties for nonconformity. You could ban something. You could censor something. You could prosecute someone criminally.
Now, hang on a second. Like you're talking about, there's like what's cool and what's not cool. Then there is like, that the unwritten rules of society, and then it escalates to it's a written rule of society. It seems like those 3 things that you categorize are escalations of how codified is this thing in culture. But then the punishments have to they correspond with that. It's like, oh, you're doing the not cool thing, and so you're considered not cool, and maybe you're shunned from your peer group. Then there's the one where you're breaking societal norms, where then people like actively might discriminate against you in polite, backhanded ways. Like, oh, well, this guy's no longer, this guy got canceled. That's the air quotes, like nothing legally bad happened
Canceling,
to him.
That's a good example.
Yeah, but he got canceled. And then there's the punitive ones where, no, you did something that is against this law that we have regulating these things, and now you are going to be like punished, like in this codified sense, anything from prison time to fines.
Yes, and we have a special way of dealing with the ones that aren't actual laws. For instance, let's say that you said hateful racial things. That's protected by the Second Amendment, not necessarily crime.
First Amendment.
Let's say
First Amendment. Second Amendment is the right to militia and to bear arms, dude. Come on.
Let's say that you kill someone. That is murder, and that's against the law.
Is it though?
When you combine
it depends on a lot of
when you combine the two, now you have what we call a murder with a tacked on hate crime. And it's murder and some, and it increases the penalty, the crime, the stigma, all those kinds of things. If you just take the hate all by itself, it's protected. If you add it to the murder, it's like it's extra special bad murder.
That's not necessarily I have feels over here. So let me sort them out for a second, because please tell me you're not like advocating for like, oh, we should be allowed to do hate crimes. Like we should take the hate out of the crime. A crime is a crime. Like I don't think that's your stance, but you made it sound that way, and I want to clarify.
No, I'm just talking about how we deal with this as a society. Like,
okay. The way you couched it made it sound like you were taking a stance one way or the other.
No. What are the buttons and dials on our console for dealing with the things that we consider to be socially unacceptable?
Yes. And there's
we've decided, at least in America, to protect free speech to a great deal, where we have things that are against our social norms and taboos that are still protected. But then when you add in...
Yeah, we can really boil this down to informal ostracism and formal ostracism. Like, informally, yes, you are canceled. Formally, you go to a building where we don't have to deal with you anymore.
Like, among the ancient Jews, you could be stoned for blasphemy. Today, there's really nothing you could say that would result in a death penalty. No words that could just come out of your mouth. Although there was that guy in Utah a couple of weeks ago.
I don't know. There are probably words that you know.
Did you hear about this?
Well, I'm sorry, I missed what you said.
Oh, you're right. Yes, I have access to top secret information. I could say it and it would constitute treason, and then I could be liable for death penalty. But it's been like 60 years since the government's hung somebody because of treason.
Oh, the good old Red Scare.
So I'm just saying it's extremely uncommon. It's not like in Jesus' time when they were, they tried to stone people every day. Yeah. And on the low end of the spectrum and the low intensity of these societal norms are things like, you're not cool anymore. You got canceled.
If you were ever cool to begin with.
Your 15 minutes of fame has ended. Sometimes your willingness to non-conform with societal norms could save your life. Do you remember back in, I want to say the mid-2000s, there was a big fire at a rock concert in a nightclub in Providence, Rhode Island?
I don't remember this.
Okay. It was a small nightclub, and it was packed too full of people, and they had some pyrotechnic fireworks that lit it on fire, and everything was way too flammable. The sprinkler system didn't work. But what happened was a societal norm problem. The societal norm in this case is you are at a place that's not your place, and you came in through a controlled entrance. And the fire code requires that facility to provide enough exits for everyone to be able to leave in a certain amount of time. But because they made everyone come in through the same door, the societal norm is you
everybody
only go in and out.
Door. They might have only known about that door, yeah.
So you only come in and out through the same door that you go. And if there was not an emergency and you tried to exit through an unapproved door, you would get immediately put back in your place. An employee would yell at you, someone would say something, those kinds of things. But in this case, it was actually a matter of life and death. The fact that people didn't try to go out other exits than the one they came in meant 80 people died in a fire.
You realize this is why flight attendants give you that briefing where all the exits are, and you think it's stupid, like, of course I know where all the exits are, but they do it because of that societal norm that you just described.
And at movie theaters, sometimes during the beginning, a little light shows up, and they show you why there are exits down at the front, and if you go to a conference, in the introductory notes, they'll point out the emergency exits. Yes, that's what this is. These are safety regulations in place to tell you, in the event of an emergency, it's okay to break the norms.
So I had, this is why I have this great story about this, because this is why they do fire drills in elementary and high school, right? Is they want to reinforce the idea. You hear the sound, you get up and you leave, and then you go to a place where you can be accounted for. Like, they are reinforcing this idea. It's not like, oh, there's a fire, everybody flee. Here, now I have a story about this. I have a story about this specifically because I was in the Air Force. I was a first lieutenant. I was in charge of a whole shop of people. I had 30 people that I supervised. And we were in a controlled building, and the fire alarm started going off. And, like, everybody just kind of did the thing where everybody looked up and, like, looked around at each other like, well, what do we do? And, like, I walked out of my office. I'm like, and I fell victim to the same thing where it's like, I'm not sure what we're supposed to do in this situation. And it was the major that came in, kicked the door down. I was like, what are you doing just standing here? That's a fire alarm. Everybody get the crap out of the building. And, like, he was the one person. Then once he kicked us into action, like, oh, well, okay, these are the things we have to do. And, like, lock the safe and, like, get up and everybody pile out and then start figuring out who's here and who's not. But
you and all the people you were working with are smart people. They know what a fire alarm means. What were some of the norms that were in place that were preventing people from acting rationally?
So, first of all, this is a controlled building, and we have secret stuff that's in there. And so, like, it's talked about.
Yes,
and there are procedures
so you
for all
have a duty to protect classified information that perhaps superseded the need to go if there wasn't immediate evidence of fire.
So we were all logically aware of the procedures of like, these are the things that the steps that we were supposed to take to secure all of this before we evacuate in case of emergency, but we had never practiced evacuating for an emergency. What's far more common is we get the email at the beginning of the day that says, hey, they're going to test the fire alarm. Don't leave your desk. Everything's fine. That is, so we never did an actual fire drill. We always did the fire alarm is going to go off, ignore it. And so like just putting those two things next to each other, it makes you really understand this is why we do fire drills when you're in school, is because if you didn't, people would just stand around like sheep.
Yeah. And it's practicing breaking the norms. Like, this is the situation in which we go through the door with the big red sign on it that says, don't open this door.
You're not allowed to talk. You're not allowed to get up and run around. You're not allowed to disrupt class unless the fire alarm goes off, in which case we are all going to get up. We are all going to make a ruckus, and we are all going to abandon learning for however long it takes.
Yeah. Nice. My first year teaching, the principal needed to do a fire drill, and I think he was initiating me. It was a little bit of teacher hazing. I was in my class, and I turned around, and the principal's standing there with the fire chief.
Oh, dear. This is before or after the fire alarm started going off?
Before.
Oh, but you knew it was coming now.
Yeah, well, this is before I knew what military exercises were like, but, they hand me a card that's like, your classroom is on fire.
Oh, no.
So I had to be the one to decide to break all the social norms.
Well, and to initiate it. Like, what? That was really a test not only for the class, but for you. What are you going to do in this situation?
Yep. So I had to go out in the hall and pull the fire alarm and line my kids up and take them out the nearest exit and take them to the designated spot and take attendance and all that stuff.
I was going to ask you specifically if you pulled the fire alarm and then screwed over the rest of the school, or if that was not part of the scenario.
No, I did all the things. But this is an aspect of my personality you probably know. I love opportunities to break societal norms when it's allowed. I do it with zeal.
So, all right, this is something that you should know about me, is based on the conversation we've had in this podcast episode. I've had to create all of these in my mind. And so as I'm going through and constructing societal norms, I get to consciously evaluate how worth it is this societal norm. Do I care enough to actually encode this in my brain, or am I just going to continue acting the way that I act? This is where they pull forward in the drive-through. No, thanks, I'm not going to do that. That's where that came from.
Yes, exactly. You were like, no, I'm going to question this particular norm. All right, let's do a rapid fire mode.
Okay.
Newborn babies.
Oh, they're so adorable and absolutely don't smell like ham.
They smell sweet and they look beautiful, even if they smell terrible and look horrible.
Both of those things are true.
Brides.
Oh, it's such a lovely day, and it doesn't, and you absolutely deserve to wear white.
Every bride is beautiful. Here's a good example. Okay, so there's another aspect of this, and that's over time our norms change, and we may not even realize it. Like, for instance, when I was a kid, if you wanted to talk to someone, you called them on the phone, and if you wanted to see them, you went to their house and knocked on the door. And now calling people on the phone and knocking on the door is almost kind of weird.
Only Murders in the Building is a series on Hulu. They talked about this.
Yeah, it was Steve Martin and Martin Short.
Steve Martin Short, and they're I can't remember the female's name, but she's much younger, and that's the generation gap is addressed in the show multiple times. And one of the things that they say, Martin Short and Steve Martin are together, and they're like, "Oh, should we call her?" And then they pause for a second. Martin Short looks at him and goes, "They get upset when you call," and like it was just like they just didn't understand that.
Yeah, but they knew. Wait, I probably better not do this, but I can't remember why.
Yes. And then knocking on the door. Yeah, I hate it when people knock on my door.
Polite physical contact. Think of how much COVID transformed that so fast. We went from handshakes being the norm to now like fist bumps are the norm. But I got a lot of friends that kind of like to make this awkward thing where you go for a handshake and then change to a fist bump and then go back. And there's this one colonel that's a bit of a dad joke prankster, and he has like 100 different things he'll do to make you feel awkward. Like you go for the handshake, make a fist bump, and he'll grab it and call it a gear shift and move it around, or do the turkey where he puts the hand out. Yeah, that's great.
But anyway, you can talk to people in my sphere of influence that will come in with the arms out like they want a hug. hug, and they will get a stiff arm from me like I'm an NFL fullback. Like, nope.
Oh, there's this old Mr. Bean sketch where a girl goes to give him a hug, and he puts his hand on her face.
I don't usually go for the face, but I go for someplace that is okay to touch. But I have stiff-armed multiple people from giving me a hug.
That's another one. I'll put an image in the show notes. Heat map of where you're allowed to touch a stranger.
Nowhere. Don't touch strangers. Like,
Josh,
if I'm a stranger,
stop.
you don't touch me.
A heat map gives a heat map of where you're allowed to touch strangers.
The only place I'm allowed to touch a stranger is their face with my knuckles. Like, don't come touching me.
All right. Let me give you a scenario. You're behind someone. Let's say they drop their wallet on the ground and it's noisy and you try to talk to them, but they can't hear you and you need to get their attention and it's crowded and you can't get around in front of them. What part of their body do you touch to get their attention?
Oh, it's always the top of the side of the shoulder. Like it's like this 90-degree arc, and that's
the heat map I'm talking about. You know this intuitively. Yeah. You understand it.
You know what? That's a good point. Next time I'm going to the airport next week. If somebody's in my way, I'm going to tap them right in the back of the head and see what kind of response that gives me.
Let's say it was a stranger on a train that you'd had an amicable chat with, and as you were going, they said something like, "I'm on my way to my mother's funeral," and you wanted to express a little physical gesture of sympathy as they're about to go. Then what place would you touch them?
Ben, you're talking to the wrong guy. Like,
okay, here's what I would do.
Emotional empathy. No.
I would extend my hand and place it on their forearm.
Their forearm.
On their forearm.
Ew. Like
imagine you're standing close to me and I put my hand on your forearm and say, "I'm so sorry. I hope I hope she rests in peace and you're able to mourn your
Ben,
loss."
you said that and I reflexively pulled my arm up to my chest like a fetal position. Don't touch me, man. That's weird. Don't stop touching people.
So the Kuwaitis have a very different heat map for touching than we do, and I've had a few situations where I've been uncomfortable. I just have to. I don't need to make them. I'm in their country. I don't need to make them conform to my societal norms. I'll try to figure theirs out and just be like, okay, that's what they do. The Italians, I'll do the air kisses thing. Like, everybody's got different norms about these things.
Don't air kiss me. You'll get stiff armed.
All right, we're still doing driving. Let me give you an example of a regulative, a constitutive, and a prescriptive example in driving. So in driving, like, regulative is which side of the road you drive on. Like, that's not optional. It's not a norm. It is a norm, but it's codified into law. Constitutive would be like road rage guy. Like, don't be road rage guy.
Don't tell me. Don't write up on me. That's legal, but stop.
There's a list of legal behaviors that you do that kind of show that, and don't do that. And then there's prescriptive ones like that we enforce that aren't necessarily wrong, like being in the left lane. Like, if you're going the speed limit, technically you can be in any lane you want unless it's specifically posted. But we don't like that.
Listeners, this is all right. So there are
Josh
a handful
doesn't
of
like.
things.
Josh started gritting his teeth as soon as I mentioned this.
There's a stretch of highway between where I live and Flagstaff, Arizona. It's the I-17. It's 2 lanes, both directions, all the way. If you are going the speed limit or slower than me and you're in the left lane, like, honestly, it's gotten so bad, Ben, that I feel like that should be I should be able to stone you. I should be able to pull you over and stone you to death for driving the speed limit in the left lane.
We stumbled into one you feel quite strongly about. So I want to give a quick little vignette right here at the end as we're kind of winding down on this, of one that happened within my church. And so there's subgroups within a society, and within the American or the world society, my church has its own set of societal norms. And one is generally that the church frowns upon members getting tattoos. They give scriptural reasons for it, but really it's a societal norm thing more than anything. There's lots of, like, Pacific Islanders that have tribal tattoos that are very normative in that society that don't signal any kind of bad behavior in the church. Anyway, sometimes we'll have someone that converts to the church later in life and they'll have a lot of tattoos and they'll kind of stand out because they're the only person around without tattoos. And there was this one girl that was really popular on social media that converted to the church, and she had a kind of a bad experience early on where she interacted with a member in a toxic way, where he was kind of transmitting these norms to her. But it's not something you would do easily, and so he was just kind of giving her this feeling of disapproval inside of the community.
This is all right. That's a whole topic.
Let me finish the story. So she went and blogged about it online, and there was this reckoning that happened inside the membership of the church where we talked about how toxic that kind of thing was and how inappropriate it was in the context of our beliefs. but why it happened. And she got so popular that she became a popular public speaker in the church. And she came and spoke to my congregation in Illinois. And there was like 1,000 people in the room. And she was at the podium talking to all the youth about these ideas, about how, hey, I might look different than you, but I believe too. And you can accept me. And even the fact that we invited her to come and say that shows this reckoning that was happening with trying to change the norms.
Okay, hang on. Like we invited her, so we should get brownie points. Is it still okay to get a tattoo, Ben? Can you go get
Josh,
a tattoo?
That's a mean thing to say, Josh.
No, you started it. You put forward
we invited
the premise.
her because we were trying to change the culture.
Right. So did you? Is the culture changed? Are you just giving yourself a pat on the back for inviting her for trying to change the culture, or did you change the culture? Those are two different things.
You made me mad. I'm not trying to virtue signal here. I'm just talking about Christians trying to do the right thing for the right reasons. I trying to reckon with bad norms and toxic behavior.
And all I'm trying to do is point out the fact that there is actually making the changes that you want to implement, and then there is paying lip service to say that we're trying to make the change, but not actually trying to make the change.
So we've talked about the mechanisms and the types: regulative, constitutive, evaluative. This changed on all three levels. There's a publication in the church called For the Strength of Youth that had a specific prohibition against getting tattoos. And there was a very public revision of that. I think I may have even talked about it on the podcast a little while back, where they took out that prohibition in that book. And so there is no longer any specific prohibition in the official publications of the church.
So when are you and I going to sit down and get a tattoo? I want a magic tattoo. I will sit down next to you. We'll get them together.
I know. I'm thinking about the Is It Guild logo. Maybe right here on my left shoulder.
Yeah. I'm still of the old school where, like, I'll get tattoos, but I don't want them to be super visible. But I honestly think the next one's going to be, like, on my calf where anybody can see it when I'm wearing shorts.
The real Mormon counterculture way to do this is to get one that's like a symbol of the church, like the BYU logo or the face of the prophet or the CTR that we use or something like that. That's this weird amalgamation of like doing something that's culturally frowned upon, but in a way that looks like you're honoring the church.
Well, it's either a taboo or it's not. And now going back to my original thing that I bucked at was the idea that this member approached this person and was signaling that you are doing something that's against the whole. That's against social norms in a negative way. And that person did it in such a... They were being passive-aggressive almost because
and it was toxic. It was.
Right, but this is the thing, is that person didn't know that. Like, instead of, like, taking a step back and explaining to this new member that what you're doing or the things that you have done are counter to the culture, it was just part of it. Like, he never thought about the culture. The culture just existed and he was a part of it. And then he expressed all the negativity without understanding really why.
It was nuanced. I'll post her original social media post. I think she had like sleeve tattoos and she was holding a copy of the Book of Mormon. And he said something to her that wasn't overtly toxic. It was like, you're going to have trouble fitting in or something like that.
Yeah. Just signaling in a passive way.
Yeah. Yep. And she just took it really internally in a way that felt like they're never gonna accept me.
No, the actual, which might be true because you have even talked on this podcast about instances in that culture that even you disagree with. Like this is bad part of our culture that we should change. And
so that's the reason I'm considering getting a tattoo, Josh, as a way of like
embracing
just
it
to signal, that I'm recognizing that we have changed. Because, okay, there's an example in the New Testament. When Jesus came and set up his church, he basically told them to stop doing all of the things they've been doing under the law of Moses. All of the prohibitions they had on food they could eat, on stoning people for blasphemy, all these kinds of things. He changed everything. And some of his disciples wouldn't let go of their cultural norms. He changed it so radically they didn't want to let go. And they, like, for instance, he said, you don't have to worry about not eating pork anymore. Like, we're not doing that anymore. And they still wouldn't. And I wonder if my own church is like that too. Like, hey, you don't have to worry about not getting tattoos anymore. But some people are like, yeah, but still don't do it.
Well, and that's the difference, right? The culture, the organization can say, hey, we're no longer prohibiting a certain behavior. You are still allowed to believe in and conform to the more restrictive behavior. What you're no longer allowed to do is signal to people that choose differently than you that you're superior, that their ideas are wrong and your ideas are correct. Like the organization has removed that right from you. You can still not eat pork and not get tattoos all you want, but you're not allowed to sit and shame or try to gatekeep people that want to do that.
Yeah. Yep. And it's a hard thing. It dies hard. It dies hard in societies, in organization. I mean, these mechanisms we set up, particularly with the high intensity ones, they're just very robust. As we always say on this podcast, culture eats strategy for breakfast.
And this is a problem not just in your church, but across the world. Listeners, I know you can think of an example of things that are very important to people that instituting that belief in a large scale would be restricting of other people's freedoms that don't believe those same things. That's where I really start to grate. And if we weren't already past the 2-hour mark, boy, I would dive into that and lose some listeners.
Quick story. So I posted some photos on the podcast last week of going to tour the Grand Mosque here in Kuwait City. And our group was approximately 50-50 men and women. And when we first arrived, the men who'd been told not to have visible tattoos all had visible tattoos and no changes were made. The women who'd showed up with their hair visible were taken into a back room and forced to put on burqas before they could tour the mosque.
Male default thinking. How dare they? They should have taken the men and given them long sleeve shirts like they said they were gonna.
Yep.
You see, there you go. Where's the book? It happens all the time. This male default thinking is ridiculous. All right, Ben. So what I got from this whole conversation, like we talked a lot about social norms. We talked a lot about how we codify them differently in society and how we deal with them and the repercussions, both codified and uncodified. What I'm coming out of this with is that you and I have an appointment at MagicCon Vegas 2024 to get matching tattoos.
All right, listeners. Well, over the course of this discussion, I'm sure you thought of a few social norms of your own. I want to hear what they are. So you could go on our subreddit at reddit.r/badatmagic or go to our Facebook page, link in the show notes, and tell us what some of your social norms are. What are the ones you thought of? What ones should we change? What ones do you think are particularly valuable? We want to hear from you.
If you like what we do, consider sharing us with a friend. If you like us, maybe your friends will like us too. If you really want to show us some love, consider taking your phone out of your pocket and giving us a good review on the podcast player of your choice. And thank you to everyone that already has. And if you want me to continue to be a corrupting influence on Ben from now until the end of time, consider becoming a patron on our Patreon page.
And until next time, try to be a little less bad at magic.